Our story takes place in the Kartia Empire, a noble house considered the most powerful after the royal family. At Duke Rosenwester's estate, a young woman reports that things were unfolding exactly as planned. The Duke was the Emperor's right-hand man, as well as the patriarch of a house well known for its cold-blooded nature. His name was Lexian Rosenwester, a very handsome man but extremely frigid. At that moment, our protagonist was trying to strike a secret agreement with this man full of mysteries. She cries, begging Lexian to help her, while he simply sips his tea without the slightest hint of empathy. The girl needed him to marry her. She was in a humiliating situation, kneeling before the Duke and pleading for him to grant her request. Lexian's bad reputation began right at his birth, as the boy was the result of an affair, a bastard in that conservative society. Because of this, in an attempt to protect his place in the line of succession, the young man eliminated his own brother in cold blood. But Lexian was like that, a man without feelings who had spent most of his life on the battlefield, sending thousands of people straight to their graves. Without a doubt, the Duke was a mere killer, devoid of authority, yet one who still insisted on defying imperial power. And he was popularly known as the Emperor's hunting dog. However, now there he was, having to listen to a marriage proposal in the middle of his rest. The man approaches the MC, still expressionless, suggesting that what she truly wanted was help divorcing her current husband. Sereniel Verdelais seemed increasingly hopeless about the success of her plan. Even so, she made it clear that her proposal would be advantageous to him as well, swearing that it would even benefit him, something the man greatly doubted. So he asked why the girl thought that, to which she replied that she owned a mine, currently managed by her husband, which would soon begin producing magical minerals. Before he could respond to anything, Sereniel added that these were very valuable items and explained that once she divorced and reclaimed her administrative rights, she could share the profits with Lexian. But he did not seem impressed, leaving the girl without the slightest hope. He steps a little closer, staring at the MC with his cold, distant eyes. The Duke states that he was not interested in just any mine, and he confesses that, in truth, he was more interested in learning about the woman's husband, Kalyan Helkar, which deeply frightens her. Lexian continues his speech, suggesting that at least she had been honest about him. Sereniel falters. She did not expect him to insist on speaking about her husband in that way. The memories terrify her. She remembered when she was completely devastated in front of the grave of someone very dear, and her husband called out to her, arguing that if she continued insisting on that, she would certainly end up ruining her own health as well. The man tried to comfort her, commenting on how he wished he could take that sadness from her and bear it himself. The blonde girl looked at Kalyan with a certain hope in her eyes. She was visiting her parents' grave, for at only 16 years old, she lost both of them in a terrible accident, becoming an orphan overnight and losing everything she had. At that time, the two were just childhood friends, and she knew she owed him a great deal. The young man extended his hand to the girl, presenting himself as a light at the end of the tunnel and promising that he would protect her. Without him, she would never have found the strength to go on with her life, and that was why she decided to marry him. It did not take long for her to seek out her only remaining relative and announce that wish. However, Count Vetter could not accept the marriage between the two, because to him, Kalyan was nothing more than a beggar. Even so, his niece explained that he was not poor enough to be called a beggar by her uncle, just not exactly rich. Because of that, she begged him to give the man a chance. Her statement made Count Vetter laugh, saying that he thought she wanted to talk about something more serious than that, and explaining that even if she had fallen in love with that man, being with the son of a viscount who had no financial means whatsoever would not be possible. Nevertheless, the girl argued that if she could marry Kalyan, she would not need anything else, not even a superficial dowry, for she was certain that as long as she had her mother's mine, it would be enough. Under those conditions, her uncle decided to grant the girl's wishes. On the day of their wedding, the celebration was beautiful, and Kalyan promised the girl that he would make her happy forever. Thus, she finally married her first love. She received congratulations from everyone. Her best friend came with open arms to congratulate her, commenting on how beautiful she looked. And she quickly jumped into Laray's arms, thanking the girl for being there, which of course she would never miss, because what mattered most to her was seeing happiness in Sereniel's eyes. The two were almost like sisters, childhood friends, and having the girl's blessing filled our girl's heart with so much joy. At least on that day, she felt like the happiest woman in the world. When it happened, she truly believed that everything was real, but now she knew she had been nothing but a fool, believing that Kalyan loved her with the same intensity that she loved him, but what awaited her was far worse. In reality, our girl was led to a cruel fate. Her men shouted to protect her, but it was already too late. The girl was found dead in her room, completely alone. The servants urged haste so that someone could get a doctor to attend to her, but there was no longer anything that could be done. 4 years after the marriage, the girl collapsed due to an illness no one knew, and she was never the same again. During the winter, the maids tried to do everything possible to keep her warm. However, on one of those days, her maid asked if everything was all right when she noticed that she was spitting blood. The handkerchief she used to cough was covered in that red liquid, but there was nothing more to be done. The girl was delirious, asking Kina to fetch Kalyan and Lorray. She desperately wanted the maid to understand everything before it was too late. Those would be her final words, because she no longer had enough strength. Until her husband and her best friend suddenly entered the room, shouting for the woman. The maid tried to warn them about what was happening. However, it was already too late. Tears streamed down Kalyan's face in desperation as he pretended to care. Then he asked the maid to leave the three of them alone in the room, a request that surprised her since she was apparently very attached to the girl. But the man justified it by saying that he wanted to say his final words to his wife in private. So the two ended up there alone, just staring at the protagonist's body, lamenting the girl's condition. Lorray could not stop crying as she approached her, grabbing Serenial's hand to check whether she had truly passed on. But that false remorse soon ceased when she told the husband of her supposed best friend to pinch her nose to make sure she was dead. She needed to make sure that the protagonist had really stopped breathing, but Kalyan could not care less and questioned whether they really needed to do that, especially since the doctors were already on their way to issue the death certificate anyway. To which the girl retorted, saying that she might not be dead yet. And as if the MC meant absolutely nothing to him, the man stated that he did not want to touch someone who had spat blood like that, explaining that she died because of the poisoning carried out by the two of them. Of course, her blood was not contagious at all, but it was still disgusting. At that moment, Serenial could still hear everything, though she did not know what they were talking about. She could not believe the reality, that it was nothing more than a diabolical plan by the two most important people in her life. But they did not know that, and simply continued arguing, ordering that the doctor be called immediately because Lorray no longer wanted to waste even a second of her life on that, arguing that she had been waiting for that day for a very long time. And that made Kalyan break into a smile, telling her not to worry, because now the two of them could live alone. That is, alone together with their child, the royal family he had always wanted. Serenial was shocked, for she discovered that the two people she loved most in this world had been betraying her all along. But that was not all. Now he could finally call Benny, who had spent years hidden away in the village with his nanny, to celebrate his 7th birthday there at the palace. In other words, for the past 7 years, the protagonist had been made a fool of. Before leaving, he asked Lorray to step away from Serenial's dead body because she brought very bad luck. The truth kept sinking in for our girl. She had experienced the greatest betrayal of her life. With a cynical smile on his face, Kalyan pretended to mourn his ex-wife, while Lorray smiled at the corpse's face, asking, as if she would actually answer, whether she had never suspected the affair between the two of them. Sometime earlier, the girl had received a letter saying that they had obtained a tea that was supposedly meant to help with her fertility, instructing her to drink it every day without fail. Lorray even thought it was foolish that Serenial had blindly trusted that promise. But now everything made sense. The tea had been poisoned. Even so, Serenial did not know why her friend had done something like that. And on her deathbed, the red-haired girl said without a shred of remorse that she had never thought of the protagonist as a friend. The two met when Lorray appeared at the palace, and the little girl wanted to play with her. But for Lorray, ever since their first meeting at her family's orphanage, she knew they were not on the same level, and was certain that Serenial had always looked down on her as inferior. Yet she spent her whole life pretending to be a pure person, kind-hearted, and all that nonsense. When, in reality, throughout all those years, her supposed friend harbored no good feelings at all, only hatred toward the girl. But now, look where she was. She had reached the end of her life with nothing. Finally, Lorray turned her back. But before leaving, she remarked that at least Serenial had enjoyed playing with something that belonged to her, thinking she possessed Kalyan. And for that reason, even if she ended up in hell, she should thank her and remember one very important detail. It was not she who killed her, but Serenial's own ignorance, stupidity, and blind trust. In her final moments, the girl saw her world crumble before her eyes. The man she loved more than anyone in that world, Kalyan, had never loved her. And that made Serenial feel miserable. She could not believe that this was how it would end. Memories flooded her mind like machine gun fire. She heard Kalyan saying that he loved her, and also her best friend commenting that Serenial was the most precious friend she had ever made. But now she was losing her mind, because everything was a lie. Everything they had said, everything they had done until then. They had been laughing at her expense all this time, and now they were trying to kill the poor protagonist, who could not understand how they were capable of betraying her trust like that. Even so, she was determined not to give in. She refused to die like that. No, she would take revenge. She would make the two of them suffer the same miserable fate she had. So she begged that, if there truly was a god listening to her, that he would please allow her to return to life. That was how Serenial ended up bargaining with the Duke of Rosenwester, taking advantage of her second chance. She made it clear that she no longer loved Kalyan, and probably would never be able to love him again. Thus, she asked the Duke to give his final answer at once. But he merely explained that she did not seem to understand even the basics of how to make an agreement, because in a situation like that, what mattered was not what she could offer, but what the other party desired. Impatient, Serenial asked what he meant by those words. Then Lexian decided to propose something else. He would help her, however. In exchange, she would need to give exactly what he wanted, nothing more, revealing that he had two desires. The first was that the girl throw that useless little man away, and the second was that Serenial should remain married to him forever. That second part left the girl distraught, and, noticing her silence, the man pressed on, asking whether she had understood. That this meant Lexian wanted to have her completely to himself. His name sounded like honey dripping from the man's mouth. Flashbacks of that night covered in snow and storms when the MC died rose to the surface. The girl realized at the moment of her death an ugly truth. She was nothing more than a naive little woman who did not notice or suspect for even a single second that her own husband and her best friend had been having an affair all that time. She had been stripped of everything she owned, murdered and entangled in a drama filled with love and hate. She considered herself a pitiful heroine in the midst of that terrible and absurd story. A weak, naive, soft-hearted heroine. In that moment of transition between life and death, the girl felt herself sinking. But her thirst for revenge was far greater. She was willing to fight to reclaim everything that was rightfully hers. And so she begged God for one more chance, if that God truly existed. Then, with a scream, Serenial woke up in her bed, rising abruptly. She was completely out of breath, and shocked because the blood that had covered her sheets was no longer there, nor was the pain in her body, so she could not help but wonder what the hell had happened, despite smiling from sheer emotion. Suddenly, something caught her attention in that magical moment. The door to her bedroom opening, followed by the image of Kina smiling, wishing her good morning and asking whether Madam had slept well. That surprised her a little, after all. She had just died. It was a relief to see that woman who had taken care of Serenial since she was just a child. The maid went on to say that she was about to come in to wake her, but was interrupted when she noticed tears falling from the girl's eyes, who hugged her compulsively, out of nowhere. Kina asked what was wrong while the girl smiled, still breaking down in tears, and she let slip that she had truly come back, which must have left the poor woman even more confused. Outside her immense mansion, the day was beautiful. The leaves and flowers of the garden emitted a glow worthy of a movie. In the midst of her death, she had even wondered whether she would live long enough to see the next spring arrive. She had fallen into despair so many times, but fortunately for her, she had managed to return 4 years into the past. She just did not know how or why. Sometime later, Kina found her in the garden and handed her a small box filled with petals, asking her to take a look, as it was a gift from her friend Lorraine. That brought terrible memories to our girl, who now knew very well what it was about. And this was only confirmed when the maid explained that the woman had sent it under the excuse that it would be good for the Viscountess's health, especially to help her get pregnant. After all, Lorraine was very worried about not having received any good news about that, since it had been a year since Kalyan and Serenial had gotten married. The poor maid, who did not know the truth, even commented that Lorraine was a very considerate person, saying that she would prepare the tea right away for her mistress. Serenial's eyes were tense with the whole situation. However, she did not even let Kina leave and immediately grabbed the jar, screaming in terror, which made the maid ask if something was wrong. But all she said was that she would not drink that. In reality, she had a favor to ask. She wanted Kina to take that gift, with many quotation marks, to the market, which took the woman by surprise. In my opinion, she should have immediately told the maid what was going on. But the girl did not hesitate, saying that she should look for the merchant who had done business with her father for many years, and once she found him, should ask about the ingredients of that tea. Kina trembled, explaining that if she actually did that, it would be as if she were doubting Lady Lorraine. But that did not matter to our girl, who instructed that the woman should simply say she was doing what her mistress had ordered, and thus, he would keep it a secret. She turned her back on Kina, who asked where she was going, but the MC only replied that she was going out for a bit, assuring that she would be back before the sunset. However, before leaving completely, she told the woman not to tell her husband about this outing, and thus she left the palace. But before that, she told the woman never to touch the flowers with her bare hand. All of that left Kina confused. However, she was just a maid and had to follow orders. She knew that very well. Thus, the woman went on with her carriage. It still had not fully sunk in that she had truly managed to return to the past. Perhaps it was the will of God, or maybe a very cruel prank by the devil. She did not know the answer. However, she was sure of one thing. Considering that she had received a second chance, she would never, under any circumstances, repeat the same mistake twice. When she finally arrived at her destination, the girl looked majestic. She wore a cloak to hide her identity and asked the coachman to wait for her return, proceeding along the path alone. She had decided to go to the village that Kalyan himself had offered to buy when the two began the mining venture. Now she tried to remember what he had said at the time when she had expressed more concerns. Ah yes, the man said that he really wanted to create special memories with his wife there, saying that she would feel very lonely if the two of them spent entire days only in the mansion. And even so, when she stopped to think about it, there had not been a single day since they got married that she had gone to that place. At first, she blamed the man's extremely busy routine, but later she simply forgot. She had no idea that the real reason he kept her away from that village was far more different and dark. Behind a tree, the girl trembled in her new watch, until she spotted a small child desperately calling out for his father. That made the girl's eyes widen, for there was Kalyan playing with his own child, the product of an unparalleled infidelity, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The little one ended up tripping and falling to the ground, when his father told him to be careful because if he got hurt, he would end up in big trouble. And the cute little child said that it was all right. The one who was not all right was our girl, so her husband truly had a hidden child. It did not take long for the boy's mother to arrive, telling little Benny that he should listen to his father, reminding him of another day when the little boy had hurt his knee. From afar, the three looked like a family from a margarine commercial, and that made the girl remember the scene she had seen in her own room on her deathbed, when her own husband told her then best friend that the two of them could finally live in peace, just the two of them and their child. A real family, just the three of them. As absurd as it might sound to some people, our girl tried not to give in to that reality until she saw it with her own eyes. She kept lying to herself, saying that there must have been some mistake, as if her mind had played a trick on her. But now all she could do was ask herself how she could have been so naive all this time. For now she was seeing that little child, who was probably about 2 years old, materialized right in front of her, which meant that even before she had married that useless man from the very beginning, there had never been any room for her in Kalyan's life. One of the man's maids approaches the happy family, explaining that they had spotted a carriage nearby, which draws his attention, and he runs to scold the coachman, saying that he should not be there, to which the man replies that he had been summoned to that place but had probably just mistaken the route. That was not a very convincing excuse and ended up leaving the man even more enraged, shouting that there was no way he could have gotten lost and simply ended up there, but in a burst of anger, he ordered the man to leave immediately. That was very curious and not convincing at all, but at that moment, the girl felt relieved for having remembered to ask her coachman to keep her visit to that place discreet. Alone, the truth was beginning to sink in for our protagonist, who tried to hold back her tears above all else, but she was caught in a spiral of sadness. She fell to her knees on the ground, making an effort not to draw anyone's attention. A light rain began to fall over the place, finally pulling her out of her thoughts. Thus, Sereniel began walking, looking for the carriage she had arrived in. Her heart, filled with resentment, wondered what kind of people could be capable of such cruelty towards someone they claimed to love so much. Deep down, she also blamed herself for never even suspecting that the two were having an affair. Perhaps Lorraine was right, and the Viscountess was nothing more than ignorant and foolish. But she could not help questioning whether that alone meant she deserved to go through so much humiliation. Was it really her fault? Suddenly, a carriage pulled up beside her, catching her attention because she had told her coachman to wait far from there. But the door opened quickly, and someone very important stepped down holding an umbrella. It was not her carriage. A man holding the umbrella commented that he did not think the weather was very suitable for an afternoon walk. It was Lexian, who approached the girl, covering her, wanting to know if she agreed. He knew our girl's name very well, and she knew him as well. However, the question that would not go away was why he was there. She knew that if the man got too involved in the situation, things would only become more complicated. So she decided to dodge the question, and explained that she had some business to take care of there, even though he did not believe it. She simply turned her back, saying that it was good to have met him regardless of the circumstances, and then asked to be excused. However, before the MC could leave, he explained that it was very common to encounter thieves in that area, asking whether she did not realize how dangerous it would be for a fragile woman like her to be alone in a place like that. And that finally caught her attention. Without further delay, the man told her to hurry and get into his carriage. He was definitely a very persistent man. Even against her will, she obeyed. Perhaps deep down she thought he was right, or maybe she did not want to raise more suspicion about the real reason she was alone in that place. The girl tried to enjoy the ride, or at least she tried. She seemed a bit tense because deep down she thought the inside of the carriage would be a little more spacious than it actually was. But there she was, cramped together with the man, her knees brushing against Lexian's every time the carriage swayed even slightly. Trying to break the silence, the man asked why a noble daughter of a viscount was in such an abandoned place. That was strange. Was he referring to her as the noble daughter of a count? However, thinking about it, the girl remembered that the Duke had called her by her maiden name earlier, which was a bit confusing since she was already married to Kalyan. But she did not insist on that, and simply said that As she had mentioned before, she had gotten a bit lost on her way back home and that it was nothing important. That made the man smile. It was nothing important. Arguing that, as far as he knew, there was only one reason that could explain why a woman would act in such a suspicious manner while walking drenched under the rain, which offended Serenial somewhat. But he did not care in the slightest and simply added that there had to be some man involved in the whole story. And he gave the girl the opportunity to tell the truth, asking whether that was indeed the reason. He even commented that Kalyan's estate was nearby, pretending he wanted confirmation from the girl, but he did not even wait for her to answer before saying that the area was perfect for hiding someone. Serenial clenched her fists in her own clothes out of sheer nervousness, but she tried to remain firm as she asked the Duke whether he had let her into his carriage just to ask something so indiscreet. And she shouted that, even if that were the case, it concerned only her. It was nothing the man should meddle in, and once again she stated that, as she had said before, she was only in that place to handle business. Even so, Lexian did not fall for it, stating that she was not good at lying and that if she were truly telling the truth about it being just business, she would not have shed so many tears that her face had turned red like that. His remark surprised the girl. She had not known that he had been there for so long. The rest of the journey was tense and silent. However, when she finally arrived at her palace, the protagonist thanked him for the ride, taking the opportunity to apologize for having behaved in such a rude manner, especially considering that it was the first time the two of them had met. Moreover, as it was getting late, she asked the man to be careful on his way back, but Lexian interrupted her, explaining that he did not think that was the first time the two of them had met, which took the girl a little by surprise, but all he said was that apparently she had forgotten. Then he changed the subject, asking whether at least the girl was happy, which did not make much sense to Serenial, but the man simply repeated the question, even though it seemed so sudden to her. He made it clear that it was a more important question than she imagined. That was why he asked her to answer honestly. What did he mean by happy? All that came to the girl's mind was anguish. She knew there was no way she could even pretend to be happy unless she had completely lost her mind. She was so furious that she could barely sleep properly, and that was her sad reality. Just remembering the face of her foolish husband and of Lorraine was enough to make her feel the anger burning on her face. And there was still that child, who was not at fault at all, but only added to Serenial's pain. She did not even need to answer for the man to understand, just by observing the girl's clenched fists. And he was sincere when he said that he could understand everything perfectly well, but he decided not to dwell on the matter, only asking the girl to hurry and rest, assuring her that the two of them would certainly meet again very soon, whether she liked it or not. And so he left the girl standing there like a statue. Sometime later, inside the castle, her arrival caught Kina's attention, who celebrated her return, explaining that she was very worried because she had not arrived at the time she said she would, to which the girl apologized. But the maid was more concerned about the fact that she was soaked, so she asked what had happened, and the girl explained that she would talk about it better later, but for now she needed to rest a bit. Thinking about it, the woman said that she would prepare a change of clothes for Madame and something for her to eat immediately. However, the young woman explained that she did not want any of that right now. She only needed the woman to inform her husband that she was not feeling very well. But there was one more detail. Lady Lorraine was at the palace. That was enough to make the woman tremble. She was not even sure she had heard it correctly. But Kina explained that she had come together with the Viscount as the two of them wanted to share a pleasant dinner with the girl. She could not believe the audacity of the two of them in actually going there together and returning together. To her own home, it was almost violent to her. The maid also explained that she had told Kalyan that she had gone to the Count's city, explaining to him that the reason for the outing was a matter concerning how she was doing, because she could not think of a better excuse. And the girl thanked her, revealing that she had been planning to go to her uncle's house anyway. Already in the Viscountess's bedroom, Kina asked if she truly wanted her to inform the two traitors that she would be resting, but the girl changed her mind. Serenial asked her to prepare a dress for her to wear. Before she went downstairs, the maid informed her that she had placed in the drawer the item Serenial had mentioned earlier. Now, what mattered to our protagonist was not how she felt, but how she would achieve her revenge. Inside the drawer was a very important envelope for the girl. She pulled it out, wondering whether she should expose the two traitors right away. Everyone knew that Lorraine, a commoner, already had an involvement with a nobleman, and she would not be able to escape punishment for that. In any case, she knew it would be good to speak with her uncle about it so the two of them could decide what action to take. Suddenly, a noise caught the girl's attention, making her put the item away abruptly. It was the couple of the year, Kalyan and Lorraine. They commented that they had heard she had gone to the Count's city, and since she had returned very late, her best friend was worried. Serenial forced a smile, apologizing for worrying them both and suggesting that they must be hungry by now, inviting them to share a meal. In the dining room, everything was perfect, and the couple sat across from the girl. Breaking the silence, Lorraine took the opportunity to ask whether her friend had received the tea she had sent, triggering a small alarm in our protagonist. Feigning kindness, the girl commented that she had explained it better in the letter, but she was sure it would be a great help to Sereniel, and she reiterated that it was important for her to drink the tea every day. Her comment made Sereniel's hands tremble even more, and this did not go unnoticed by her loved ones. When she realized she was acting strangely, she tried to change the subject, thanking them for the thoughtful gift. However, when she suggested that the girl must be hungry and urged her to hurry, our girl ended up triggering an alert in Lorraine. She changed the subject, turning to her husband to ask how business had been going lately, which almost made him choke on the meat. But the girl was very clever in redirecting the conversation, explaining that it was her uncle who was worried. As he had said, he could not get in touch with the man for an inspection, since he was very busy trying to maintain normal operations. The man simply said there was no need to worry so much, as things with the mine were flowing well. He assured that he would contact the man as soon as possible, but his wife said there was no need for that, because she herself would pass along the message. She just needed to know the mine's current status, which seemed to offend Kalian for some reason. Still, Sereniel reiterated that she was serious, as she also needed to be aware of the state of something that belonged to her. After all, the mine belonged to her. After her parents died in an unexpected accident, the only inheritance our girl received was a mine that had only recently begun to draw attention, and Kalian made a point of dedicating his entire life to it. Of course, outsiders still doubted the stability of the income that business could generate. Even so, the true value of that mine was something else: the magical minerals, which could be traded for very high prices due to their rarity. Her men worked there day and night, and soon those minerals began to be found inside Sereniel's mine. In other words, her business was about to reach its peak profit point, but now the protagonist could not allow her husband to take advantage of that alone. That was why she decided that from then on, she would make things return to their proper place. First, she would remove Kalian from management, and then destroy everything that he and Lorraine cared about most in this life. The man even tried to argue that the girl knew nothing about business administration in an attempt to keep her away, suggesting that even if he personally taught her, she simply would not understand. But to his surprise, the response was cold, with Lorraine's interference. She said that if Sereniel resumed making the reports, her lover could focus more on management, something her friend certainly wanted as well, mocking her, saying that for her to volunteer to take on the role of an employee just for the progress of the business was a sign that she truly loved that Viscount. The girl also commented that he must feel like a very lucky man to have a woman like Sereniel, something Kalian agreed with. Indeed, he was a very, very fortunate man in the protagonist's eyes. However, there was nothing charming about it. In fact, she was surprised by how the two managed to hide their vile nature behind a smile. It made her feel sick. Out of nowhere, she simply said that starting tomorrow, he should hand over all updates on the mine's progress, reiterating what Lorraine had said, that she was doing this so he would not have to worry about other things. Thank heavens that dinner finally ended, and the girl was finally able to be alone in her room. Now that she knew the whole truth, it was hard to face those two with a neutral expression and not show her disgust and disappointment. That was why she began to value these moments alone more. But she knew that this was only the beginning of everything. The only certainty Sereniel had was that she could not be the first to fall. She opened the drawer, staring at that letter once again. It read, "I believe this is something I should tell you in person, but since you seem to be in a hurry, I wrote this letter. The tea you sent me to analyze is actually a terrible poison made from a mixture of several substances." Reading the merchant's report, Sereniel found nothing new, but all of those substances had no taste or odor. And once they entered the body, they left no trace, being completely absorbed. And even if they did leave something behind, creating an antidote would be extremely difficult. He also explained that if a person took small doses over a long period of time, no one would notice the effects. It was almost admirable how perfect those ingredients were for mixing into a tea. She could remember Lorraine's false affection, saying that this was why she should drink that demonic beverage every day. That was why she had spoken with such precision. If that tea were taken continuously, first the person's lungs would begin to fail, and after some time, all of their other organs would rot. The girl crumpled the letter. She did not need to read anything else to know the reality, because she had already lived through it. She also remembered the words her friend had spoken on her deathbed, saying that if she had known it would take that long, she would have poisoned Sereniel's food as well, not just the tea. However, there was still one more detail in the letter. The merchant said that he did not know what was happening to her, but he made it clear that if she was at risk of being poisoned, he could give the MC a small piece of advice. And Sereniel knew he was absolutely right. She was still in imminent danger. Of course, this time she knew about the girl's plan in advance, and because of that, she managed to avoid the worst. But next time, she did not know what method of poisoning they might use. However, what the girl was certain of was that she would never live a life where she did nothing but get hurt. In the corridors, Kalian was scolding Lorraine, saying that Sereniel might see them if the two started clinging to each other right there. But she argued that the other woman always went to sleep very early. so she must already be passed out in bed. He was clearly irritated. He knew that the protagonist had no idea how to manage a business, and now she was coming up with that talk about having reports delivered to her. Something Lorraine laughed at as well, thinking her friend was very stupid. However, she knew it was much better than reporting directly to Vedder, suggesting that her lover should see the situation as an opportunity to manipulate Serenial. Besides that, the girl reminded him of their plan. Serenial was about to die a very slow death, and Kalyan was surprised that the woman had actually used the poison. He seemed a little taken aback and reminded her that the two of them had agreed she would warn him before making any move, because poisoning his wife was already too much. This stressed the woman out, and she shoved him, saying that if he kept that attitude, nothing would ever change. Besides, it was not as if the protagonist was going to die overnight. The plan, in reality, was to get rid of Serenial slowly over the course of those 3 years, as he himself had mentioned before. And once she was dead, he could cut ties with Vedder so that the two of them could finally become a real family, arguing that they could not simply keep Benny locked away in the village forever. Besides, there was something the girl did not like at all: that mansion. The interior design was terrible. The man tried to calm her down, arguing that it was Serenial's taste, but it was not as if that would truly make anything better. In any case, the woman reminded him that as soon as she became his wife, she would make a point of changing everything: the furniture, the decorations, everything without exception. And she reminded him of their deal. He had promised never to spend a night with Serenial, something she had only made an exception for on the first night they spent together. But from then on, his only child should be Benny. That never even crossed Kalyan's mind. After all, he did not feel the slightest attraction towards Serenial, who listened to the entire conversation from behind the door, forced to hear that she was like a statue, a boring woman no one would ever want to hold in their arms. The next day, the girl went to the city with Kina, who commented on how long it had been since the two of them had done that. At last, they arrived at the place the maid had already prepared. However, her mistress asked her to wait in front of the shop, explaining that it would not take long. Before going inside, the girl's eyes felt heavy. She was tired of all of that, but she ended up being surprised by the man who had been occupying her thoughts, Lexian Rosenwester. She had no idea what he was doing there. Still, she tried to contain her surprise, greeting him with a good morning and saying that she was honored to meet him in a place like that. However, the man commented that she did not seem particularly honored and asked whether she was buying new tableware. But even if that were the case, there was no need for her to do it personally, suggesting that perhaps she had another reason for being there, whispering in her ear that she had come to the shop to ask for something that needed to be kept secret. That was why she had to go there and personally ask everyone to keep their mouths shut. Or perhaps it was both of them. As always, Serenial pretended not to know what he was talking about with those insinuations, and she turned her back, saying that she had an appointment, wishing the Duke a safe return. Finally, the girl entered the shop. She was welcomed by Paul, who greeted her warmly. The shop was empty, and he explained that it was because he knew the Viscountess would be coming, so he had asked the other customers to leave. He got straight to the point, explaining that he had already heard that the protagonist had something to ask of him, and that he was very interested. First of all, Serenial pulled something very important from her pockets, a small pouch, whose contents left Paul astonished. The woman did not beat around the bush and simply said that it was money for him to keep quiet about what they were going to discuss there. But she made it clear that she would not do anything that would put him or his family in danger, so he did not need to worry. Still somewhat shocked, the man asked what her request would be, to which she replied that she would like him to make silver tableware for her. However, she needed it not to look like silver at first glance, commenting that with his skills, that should be an easy task. Of course, she would pay separately for the materials and the labor. And she made a point of reminding him that Paul would not be putting himself in danger because of this. Suddenly, they heard a voice saying that this was indeed true, a voice our girl knew very well, and it was enough to make her eyes widen along with the shop owners. Our favorite busybody, Lexian Rosenwester, entered the shop saying that simply making a set of tableware would not put him in danger, unless it was used to kill someone. She could not believe that man had actually followed her and completely disrespected her privacy. In my opinion, he was a crazy stalker, but there he was, Duke Lexian, standing boldly right in front of her. The girl almost screamed. But she asked Paul whether he had not told her that he had gotten rid of all his customers. And he really had done so, but ended up fumbling his explanation. With all the audacity in the world, Lexian stepped closer, explaining that there were some customers he could drive away and others he never could. After all, the Rosenwester family had supported many businesses in that city for many years, even though he thought a commoner like Paul had no idea about that. Sereniel, on the other hand, remained indignant. She was certain that all that help was just an excuse to meddle in the affairs of other nobles. To prepare for what was to come, Lexion was always investigating the movements of the nobility. And to do that, the man had no problem spending any amount of money bribing merchants. Nervous, Paul apologized and, trying to return to the matter at hand, said that before anything else he would show her the silver designs he had. But Lexian interfered, saying that he wanted the simplest designs Paul had, so that they could be mass-produced quickly. That remark made Sereniel's hair stand on end. She shouted, asking what the man wanted with that and why he was interfering just to be part of her plan. But she was interrupted when the Duke explained that if Sereniel were the only one using that specific tableware, it would raise suspicions, especially from those who had lived with her in that mansion for so long. His observation left our girl shocked, so he really had been paying attention to her movements. And the man continued explaining that, in that case, it would be better to change everything she owned. However, he did not deny that he was curious to know who was trying to poison her, at a point where she needed to change all her tableware to avoid risks, asking whether that meant she was always eating alongside the enemy. He could read Sereniel like a book, commenting that in that case, there was only one suspect that came to his mind. She had been caught red-handed by a complete stranger. Even so, Sereniel tried to hide it, drawing the man's attention with as much care as possible, while suggesting that he must have spent a great deal of time on the battlefield. Even when he returned after winning the war, she knew it would not take long before he went back to fighting. And she commented that he did not participate much in the social life of the nobility. But the girl had already heard more than enough stories about him. When people gathered, the main topic usually ended up being the Duke of Rosenwester. However, she wanted to know the reason for that, because she thought he would return to the battlefield this time as well. The girl stepped closer, and finally asked why he was showing so much interest in her and her personal affairs. The man did not hesitate to ask, Who? Who had said that he would return to the battlefield? That was enough to unsettle the girl, who commented that she thought this was common knowledge throughout the Empire. When he tried to touch her face, Sereniel became nervous, questioning what the hell he was trying to do. But the man pulled a strand of the girl's hair, and coldly stated that from then on she would be responsible for spreading new rumors. That at the Battle of Crazed, the Duke had lost his interest in fighting, and because of that, would stay away from war for a while. Or rather, perhaps he would never return to the battlefield in his life. As night fell, the girl returned to the palace, throwing herself into the library with a long sigh. Her husband had begun leaving the house more often than before, under the excuse that he was busy inspecting the mines. But she knew that was just a cover to be with Lorray and his child in the village. That would not matter so much if he at least bothered to make more thorough reports on the state of the mines. But she also did not want to see the faces of the two of them, so she tried not to worry too much. This time, she would make sure not to leave a single cent to the two lovers. But to do that, she needed to get a clear idea of the current state of her business. The problem was that there was something very strange about the ledger the man had given her. The descriptions of the investments and the information about the investors were almost all hidden. Even the list she found contained only initials. Was it really necessary to keep so much secret just because of an investment fund? And if so, why? Sereniel desperately wanted to uncover the truth behind all of that, but she had heard with her own ears that Lexian Rosenwester would not return to the battlefield for a long time, which meant that the rumor about the Emperor using the Duke as a shield to get rid of nobles who kept flattering him might actually be true. For example, what if the goal of the people who invested in her mines was to build a private army? Whether true or not, that would be more than enough for the Emperor to simply eliminate his political enemies. But in that case, what should Sereniel do? She had no idea, so she chose to sleep and rest from that day that felt endless. The next day, she was awakened by Kina with her usual smile, which was returned with a small smile from Sereniel, who commented that she seemed as full of energy as always. The woman entered holding a few items, explaining that she had found some things the day before while cleaning, handing the girl a stuffed suitcase full of letters. Kina asked whether that did not bring back memories for Madam and confessed that she thought she would be happy to see them, something our girl had to agree with. Indeed, her mind was now filled with memories as she picked up one of the letters her father had written to her on one of her birthdays when she was still a child. That made our girl feel a bit emotional, but her attention was drawn to something else. There were letters from Lorray mixed in. When they were children, they used to share writings all the time. One of them read, Dear Sereniel, sometimes, but not all the time, I feel envious of you. I imagine what it would be like if I were the daughter of a noble instead of an orphan. Would you be as kind to me in that case? That made her remember the crazed look the girl had given her on her deathbed, taking advantage of the moment, and commenting that she had never thought of Sereniel as a friend. However, things were different for the MC because she was not like that. Her entire life, Lorray had been her first and only friend, and that was why she wanted to do so much for her. She had tried to offer a flower to the girl, but that wicked woman chose to turn it into a sword. In the end, Lorray was simply consumed by her inferiority complex. Perhaps that was the reason she got involved with Kellyan, so that she could feel superior to Sereniel in some way. Kina caught her attention upon noticing the worried look on her mistress's face, and showed her the dress she had worn to her debutante ball. That truly brought back memories. The girl had completely forgotten about it, but as she held the delicate fabric, she remembered how her heart had leapt from her chest on the day she wore that dress. The maid also handed her the accessories that had been kept together with it. However, there was a problem. Only one of the earrings was there, and she did not know why. That surprised the maid a little, since at the time she'd been very sad about losing the other half of the pair. But that brought back a memory, which left her intrigued, because theoretically she should have lost both. The woman also remembered that when she returned home, she was completely devastated. Her hair was in terrible condition. At a debutante ball, women were taught to dance carefully, yet something had happened that day. The girl had come across a group of bullies, stomping on a boy and calling him a rat, asking whether he even knew where he was. They beat the poor boy mercilessly, while he curled up on the ground, having to hear that this was the punishment for not having listened to the other boy. By luck or misfortune, Sereniel stepped in, pushing them aside and telling them to stop, questioning what they were doing with a serious, cold look. Sereniel placed herself between them like a brave warrior. She could endure anything, but she detested injustice. That was why she argued that so many people surrounding a single person was unfair. However, Kalyan did not care at all, only asking what was so wrong about it. He even mocked little Sereniel's face, saying that someone like her probably did not even know how that kind of arrangement worked, telling her to get lost. That made her even more indignant. How dare that snot-nosed boy treat the daughter of a very important noble family like that? She wondered whether they, too, came from families of high status in society. Even so, the protagonist did not back down, saying that if they continued with that attitude, she would call someone responsible and did not care how noble the families involved might be. But she pointed out that there were members of the royal family at that debutante ball. The boy commented on how arrogant she was. Even so, he wasted no time calling the other bullies to leave at once. Excited by this story, Kina asked what happened after she did that. So the girl went on to recount what happened after the bullies left. She approached the boy, extending her hand and asking whether he was all right. When he stood up, the girl even celebrated the fact that he had not suffered any very serious injuries. Even so, just to make sure nothing else would happen, she smiled and invited him to return to the hall together. In the boy's hands was the other earring the girl had lost. However, he did not return it. He simply slipped the jewel into his pocket. Inside the hall, the noble debutantes sat in their elegant dresses. Meanwhile, poor Sereniel shared a sofa with that stranger, not knowing what to do, since the atmosphere between the two was, at the very least, awkward. The girl even began to sweat from nervousness amid so much silence. However, something caught her attention. The boy, despite appearing confident, seemed very sad for some reason the protagonist did not understand. She could not help but stare at him deeply. But since she could not find any words, the girl decided to try another approach, standing up and timidly inviting him to dance with her. The boy's eyes lit up instantly, and he extended his hand to Sereniel, leading her into a delicate dance. After that, the two lovebirds spent the entire night twirling around the hall. Of course, they did not dance very well, since both were embarrassed by the whole situation. But our girl truly enjoyed it. They were terrible dancers, and the other nobles around them must have found it all very strange. Even so, they had so much fun that it was not difficult for the girl to ignore the stares. She finished the story by saying that even after all that, when the party ended, they simply parted ways and went on with their lives. Kina, excited, lamented the fact that the MC had not asked for the name of her dance partner that night, even though we all knew very well who it was. But she explained that she had indeed asked, trying to force her memory. She remembered that the boy said he did not have a surname, which was why she could not identify him. So she simply left after all. It was not as if there was anything else she could do about it, which was a shame, because even though the situation had been completely unexpected, the boy had still been her partner at the debutante ball, a regret Sereniel also shared. After dying and coming back to life, those memories no longer seemed very important to Sereniel. And, to be honest, she no longer had the energy to dwell on the past. Her expression startled the maid, who asked who had died. That was when Sereniel realized she had spoken out loud something that should have remained only in her thoughts, laughing and saying it was nothing. Even so, with that brought to the surface, the protagonist wondered how that mysterious boy was living his life now. As she stared at what remained of her pair of earrings, she wished that he was doing well. And believe it, he was doing more than well. Duke Lexian was in his chambers, reading a letter, sent directly from the Emperor. In truth, it was not exactly a letter that friends usually lock away, but an execution list. From the very beginning, the Emperor had been trying to use him to eliminate nobles who caused trouble for the crown. But the man did not want to get involved. That was why he kept moving from battlefield to battlefield, just to avoid the Emperor's disruptive orders. He did not think he had any reason to cling to the idea of staying alive, so he was not afraid of death and had even fewer reasons to remain in the Empire. At least, until he met someone very special again, 6 months earlier. He had ended up meeting Sereniel at one of those insignificant parties that nobles loved to host. a woman commented that her face looked radiant, suggesting that she must be enjoying life very much as a wife, and the woman smiled shyly. In a moment of courage, Lexion set his glass aside to call over the daughter of Count Vetter, asking whether she could spare him a bit of her time. With perfect politeness, she followed him to a more private place and asked if there was something he needed from her. Like honey on his lips, the man repeated Sereniel's name to ask whether she was happy, something the girl did not understand. However, the man merely repeated the question, receiving a small smile from her, before her magnificent face lit up and the words, "Yes, I am happy," filled her mouth. When Lexion heard that from the protagonist, he lost the only reason he might have had to keep living. But then the two of them met again on that day when the rain was pounding against the ground. He watched the girl walking with weary steps, and after that, everything began to change. If he decided to stay in the Empire, it would no longer be to avoid the Emperor's orders. The moment he refused to choose a side in the next war, the Emperor sent that execution list. He had no interest whatsoever in fighting a war without a very clear cause, but now everything was different, because one of the names shining there was Vader Verdelay, the uncle and only living relative of the owner of those earrings he cherished so dearly. His name was there as if glowing red. So now Lexion's situation was becoming increasingly clear. He remembered that day as if it were yesterday. The boys around him violently asking whether he knew where he was, calling him a parasite and shoving him to the ground. Perhaps he truly was a disgusting parasite. After all, his mother was a servant in a noble house, and he grew up being threatened and treated like a leech. When he was judged for that, when the time came, it was already too late for him to properly debut. His mother, sick and lying in bed, told him that he was part of the Duke's family, so he had to do it. It was her last request. However, his half-brother, who never took a single day off to leave the poor boy in peace, did not like that at all. He thought that would be his end when he saw the pair of earrings fallen on the ground and heard a gentle voice defending him, threatening to call someone else while little Lexion tried to reach the jewel. Nowadays, whenever he closed his eyes, he could see that vivid figure in his mind, her trembling voice, that moment that may have been forgotten by Sereniel. But Lexion never forgot it, not for a single day. He remembered her warm hands intertwining with his, as he touched that earring as if he could touch the girl herself. Honestly, he had wanted to return the earrings before the party ended, but it was not that he could not, he simply chose not to. Because if he returned the object and the two of them parted ways, he would have accepted the end of that young love story. And that was something the boy absolutely never wanted to do. The next day, the servants announced that Sereniel's guests had arrived, and the girl hurried to receive them, commenting that it had been a while since they had last seen each other. Paul, the shop owner, bowed before the noblewoman, asking whether she was in good health. But instead of answering, the girl commented that he had returned earlier than the agreed date, which made her ask whether he had not grown too tired by fulfilling her request in such a short time. Something he confirmed, though he did not seem regretful in the slightest, asking her not to worry and explaining that Lexion had offered him a higher payment. This caught the girl by surprise. She had no idea why he had done that. So the commoner explained that he did not know whether the protagonist was aware of it, but the Duke had great influence in the market because he always made a point of rewarding people generously. But something unsettled the man. Our Sereniel did not fail to notice this, so she asked what had happened, to which he replied that it was nothing serious. He only had a delivery to make, and he pulled a scroll from his clothes, asking the woman to burn it after reading its contents. That was definitely a surprise coming directly from Lexion. She could not believe that the Duke had actually sent something to her home, but all the man said was that he had been instructed to inform her that as soon as she saw it, she would have her answer. She was somewhat lost regarding what the merchant was talking about exactly, and he did not seem to know either. So he only said that the Duke claimed she would understand what to do and what to choose, in addition to making it clear that he believed there was only one possible answer. With everything delivered, Paul took his leave, leaving our girl alone with that mysterious scroll. Inside her room, she stared at the object with a certain unease. He had sent her the Emperor's list. Sereniel read the names and recognized them as noble names, but she did not fully understand the reason behind it. Everyone on that list was well known in the kingdom for their precious assets. Moreover, all the families mentioned there were close to her uncle. It was very strange. It could not be a simple list of important surnames, which could only mean that Duke Rosenwester knew what the girl was looking for. But how? Perhaps her guess had been right. To try to avoid a greater war, perhaps the Emperor had indeed given him a direct order to eliminate all the nobles in his way. That made her remember Paul's words about there being only one correct answer. If Sereniel truly wanted to survive under her circumstances, perhaps it was time to give in and accept the help of that mysterious man. But what truly intrigued her were his motivations for doing so. She could not deny that Duke Rosenwester was exactly the person she needed by her side right now, but to him, the girl should not be that important. So why was he willing to go so far for her sake? A noise snapped her out of her thoughts, making her hide the paper quickly, trying to cover it up. Her door was now open, and Kalyan appeared with an exhausted expression, making the girl even more tense. He seemed drunk as he asked why his wife was waiting for him awake so late. With no patience at all, she said it would be better for him to go to bed, reminding him that he had another inspection at the mines the next day. However, seeing that cold woman, Kalyan grabbed her arm and brought his face close to Serenial's, asking why she was acting so dry. Then he threw our girl onto the bed with brutal force, questioning whether the MC was in a bad mood because he had not been able to give her much attention lately. Before the poor girl could even answer, he explained that it was not his fault. It was just that he had been very busy with work since there was so much to take care of at the mines, and he falsely promised to pay more attention to Serenial, asking her not to keep those bad feelings in her heart. He was truly a disgusting man. When Kalyan tried to touch her more intimately, the girl screamed at him to stop. He ended up letting slip that Serenial was someone he felt pity for, and that was enough for the girl's expression to completely change into horror. Even so, that drunken idiot kept talking, saying that he never thought she would have such a terrible fate, confessing that he felt very sorry for her. At that moment, the girl could not help but think about why she had been betrayed by the man for whom she would have risked even her own life. He returned to his affectionate pose, perhaps regretting what he had said, asking Serenial not to worry because he would take care of her from then on until the end of his life. But this time, our girl did not stay quiet and asked, Who? Who said he would be responsible for taking care of her? Taking the opportunity to push away his hand that was still touching her arm. But this did not seem to shake Kalyan, who only reaffirmed that his wife had only two people by her side, him and Lorraine. That was why the two of them would be responsible for taking care of her from then on, something that frightened Serenial. She remembered how they had left her to die while her husband spoke as if she had nothing to worry about, asking whether she had understood everything. While caressing her face with immense sadism, Kalyan added that all the maiden had to do was stay quiet and do nothing, which made her ask what he meant by that. And his words were cold as he replied that, honestly, the protagonist was not capable of doing anything anyway. That ignited a flame of hatred in her chest, and Serenial finally pushed that idiot off her, completely consumed by rage. The man tried to grab her shoulder again, but she told him to let go, and so he did. Lying on the bed, Kalyan murmured that he had forgotten something, and Serenial asked what he was talking about. Between drunken smiles, he began to wonder how he had dared to embrace her after making that promise. But something else caught the blonde girl's attention. A key he had brought into the room. She knew what he was talking about, even though Kalyan had no idea. She remembered it as if it were yesterday, a day when she caught the two of them talking about the promise of never touching Serenial again, because from then on they would be a happy family. And Kalyan's only legitimate child would be Benny. Since he had no idea and was drunker than he should have been, he could only mutter that sometimes he wanted to try something different. But his harsh words about how Serenial acted like a statue, a boring woman who did not deserve the slightest affection, echoed in the protagonist's mind. Even so, Kalyan would not stop saying that he wanted many. It was as if he were hiding something else, something that neither Lorraine nor Serenial herself knew. That was when she realized it, but it could not be. She quickly grabbed the key on the bed, waking Kina as she ran through the corridors. The maid shouted for her mistress, trying to understand what was happening, and carefully entered the room, asking what the girl was doing there, but she did not need an answer before letting out a scream. The woman was devastated on the floor, wanting to know what had happened. She was nervous, not understanding why there was so much mystery, until she saw an object in Serenial's hand, something that completely broke her. A contraceptive potion? But Kina did not know why something like that was inside the mansion. The protagonist could not believe it. She did not expect that, no matter how bad her husband was, he would continue forcing her to take that potion. But now she was certain she would never be able to forgive him, which I think is absolutely right, since that man deserves prison. In that world, there were thousands of things whose existence many people did not even know about. Things that, if you paid a very high price, would never be revealed to others. Things that would remain in the shadows forever. And the variety was truly infinite. For example, someone like Lorraine was capable of buying poison just to kill someone. Other people sought stamina potions or hallucinogens just to satisfy their disgusting desires. Among these substances, there were potions capable of interrupting a pregnancy even after a couple had already consummated something. That was the case of the contraceptive Serenial was holding now. Holding the vial, Serenial remembered the two of them plotting, saying that Kalyan would never spend a night with her. But even after making that promise, her husband still came to visit the protagonist in the middle of the night, usually drunk, like on that day. She remembered one time when he offered wine to the girl. She replied that she did not handle alcohol very well, but even so, Kalyan insisted, saying it was just to help set the mood a little, pressuring the poor girl to drink it. And so she did, suspecting nothing while her husband stared at her with a smile on his face. Every time he pushed some drink on her, he made sure the girl also took that contraceptive, without her knowing. Sometime later, Lorraine asked whether something was going on with her, It had not been long since Serenial and Kalian had officially married, but the woman could not help noticing that her then-friend seemed very sad. She replied that it was nothing serious, just that the two of them had only spent one night of love together, which had been on their wedding night. Lorraine seemed to be waiting for more, until she realized the girl had nothing else to say and sighed, saying it was no surprise to hear that, but that she should not worry, because that probably only happened because the girl was too perfect. However, she acknowledged why Serenial was so worried, asking whether her friend wanted to have a child with her husband. And with all her falseness, the girl said she should try to seduce the man somehow. After all, men were very simple creatures and only needed an invitation to move forward. Still, she could not resist mocking the poor girl, saying she did not know whether Serenial would be capable of doing something like that. That wicked woman mocked her own friend at such a fragile moment. However, what she did not know was that Kalian had a strong desire to try different women from time to time, which meant that she too was being rejected, just like our girl had been. Kina called her attention, questioning the girl and pulling her out of her thoughts, wanting to know whether she had by any chance drunk it and taking the opportunity to ask if she knew why something like that was in the Viscount's study. Shaken to the core, the MC answered honestly that she had already drunk it many times, very many times. And in a moment of desperation, she asked the maid whether she knew why Kalian had made her drink it so many times. But before she could respond, she revealed that it was because he knew it would become a problem if she got pregnant, since he already had a child with Lorraine, revealing the whole truth to the maid, who was clearly shocked, her eyes filled with terror. She knew it was hard to believe, but she made a point of making it clear that there was no reason to lie about something so absurd. It was almost a relief to be able to share what had been consuming our girl day and night. She remembered moments earlier when her husband touched her face with those loathsome, disgusting hands, saying that there was nothing the girl could do. He had stolen things that were hers by right, and it was no longer just about his affair with Lorraine. The reality was that, to Kalian, Serenial was nothing more than a dog he could kick whenever he wanted, something he could play with when he got bored, only to throw it away right after without worrying about the consequences. After all, the girl was completely crazy about him. Unfortunately, this only showed how useless Serenial was to her own husband, the man she believed she loved for so many years of her life. But now the love had disappeared. What she wanted most was to kill that perfect margarine commercial couple. She felt hatred take over her body. After she did all of that and achieved her revenge, she would kill herself. She stood up, knocking over that potion and frightening Kina, running out of the room while hearing the maid's screams, which she chose to ignore. Serenial ran through the corridors without stopping. The girl arrived at a cliff near the mansion, staring at that vastness with cold eyes, but she was not there to throw herself off, at least not like that right away. In reality, she wanted to talk to her parents, her deceased parents who were now more missed than ever. She needed to know what to do in such an absurd situation, like a bottomless pit. The girl stared at that void that had taken her own parents from her in that terrible accident. She wanted to let the great dark waves of the ocean take her as well. Even after searching, no one ever found their bodies. They were simply swallowed by the ocean by a cruel twist of fate. And now, in that moment of so much pain and despair, the girl wondered whether she would find them if she tried to dive in there. At that moment, Serenial felt guilty. She had decided to be happy in this new chance at life. She had gone to that very same cliff on her wedding day and promised that to them. She swore she would live a firm and happy life, even without them, so that their spirits would not worry and could rest in peace, in paradise where Serenial hoped the two of them were. At least that was her vow. But at that moment, she wondered what the deceased and her loved ones would say if they saw her current situation. She was afraid they would see her as a stupid girl who trusted Kalian and Lorraine without the slightest doubt, a girl who only realized she was being completely manipulated after facing death itself. Amid so many tears, Serenial begged the two of them for forgiveness. Forgiveness for having been so foolish, for not having managed to find the happiness she sought so much. Her crying fit was interrupted by a second person commenting on how strange it was that he only ever met her in depressing situations. It was Lexian, our favorite romantic, extending a handkerchief for the poor girl to wipe her tears, assuring her that at least he did not put poison in his pocket handkerchiefs. The girl did not know how he always managed to appear at the worst possible moments, but she no longer had much strength left to say anything else and simply agreed that it was indeed strange, taking the opportunity to ask why the Duke always appeared at such delicate moments, to which he replied with a smile that it was as if she were accusing him of something, as if that sadness the MC felt were his fault, as if she were, in fact, questioning why he appeared to talk to the girl and offer some support. But the protagonist quickly explained that it was not that, and she made it clear that her life had only taken this path because of the choices she herself had made. He had done nothing wrong, especially since the two of them barely knew each other. However, the girl confessed that she could not help wondering why the two of them only managed to meet in moments like that. But in any case, she knew that seeing Serenial cry was not exactly what people expected. Trying to cheer the girl up a little, he commented that he did not think it was literally every time they met that she was like this. In fact, the last time they had met at Paul's shop, Serenial had seemed much more lively. However, he could not help but say that this time things felt different, which was why he believed that something truly shocking must have happened to her. With all the sensitivity that a cold duke, one who had fought on battlefields cutting down men, could muster, Lexian asked if that was why she had gone there, because there was no other way to calm her heart or escape her own reality. Of course, Serenial did not answer. Instead, she countered with another question. She wanted to know what the duke was doing there, especially at a time like that, in the middle of the night. As stubborn as he was, he did the same. He did not answer. He only retorted that the girl always acted that way. She never answered even one of his questions. She only responded with another question, as if she had sworn to herself that she must not trust anyone. But that made him ask whether something had happened in the Viscountess's life that made her adopt such a distant attitude. The man could have worked as a psychologist. So, perhaps trying to open up a little, Serenial explained that that place was very important to her, which was why she went there so often, especially when she had no one else around. That was new. He knew what she was referring to, so he asked Serenial whether the protagonist truly believed her parents had died in the accident, warning that sometimes what she knew might not be the full story. Of course, it was true that the case had been closed without any issues, but Lexian asked whether she had never suspected that someone might have been involved in the investigation to control it, whether she had ever wondered if the whole thing could have been planned. Silence settled between the two, before the man continued his motivational speech, saying that there were many days like that, days when you knew it was not your fault that something terrible happened, but since there was no one else to blame, there was no real escape. And if she had no one she could trust and talk to about all the things weighing on her heart, she would only end up tormenting herself even more. However, the man warned that it was precisely in moments like those that one needed to focus on what could be done from then on, because if she kept wandering through that spiral of helplessness, getting out of it would only become harder and harder. Serenial's gaze revealed that she never would have expected Lexian to say such things, and he asked whether that was because she saw him as nothing more, nothing less, than a killing machine, just like the Emperor. He did not even let her answer because deep down, that did not matter. He only needed to remind her of one very important thing. Regardless of whether she trusted him or not, the only person who could eliminate everything and everyone putting her in danger was the Duke, and only him. That was why he made it clear that he would be waiting for the day when the protagonist would come to him, and not the other way around, to ask for his help. When the girl finally found an opening to say something, she asked whether he was the kind of person who went around offering favors to people like that, since offering help without anyone even asking was quite rare in that kingdom. Holding the MC in his arms, Lexian answered with a question. As was customary in their conversations, he wanted to know whether she thought an assassin like him had a heart full of pity. But that was not it. It was just that there was an exception to every rule. Exactly like now, when he offered his help to that girl who had no idea how important she was to the heart of that man. It was already morning when the girl returned to the mansion, being greeted by Kina, who shouted asking where she had been all that time. She was so worried that she even thought Serenial might have suffered an accident. But the girl's tearful expression surprised the maid even more, so she tried to set all her worry aside to comfort the girl, saying that she must have suffered a great deal with this situation. And she cried, lamenting the fact that the woman she had raised all this time had been so alone, being honest in saying that she had been a little worried when she noticed the change in her, but never imagined that she could be the reason, because the situation was far too absurd, so not even in her dreams would Kina think of something like that. Noticing that the girl was cold, she urged her to hurry inside, and she explained that she had already put the things from the office back in their proper place, exactly where they belonged. As for the Viscount, all the maid had to say was that he seemed to have drunk far too much, and did not even appear to remember how he had made it back home. Serenial remembered that he always behaved that way whenever he drank past his limit, which happened with some frequency. She began to change clothes, certain that once again he would not remember anything, and as frustrating as that was, she knew it was for the best. Stressed, the woman also mentioned that he had asked where the girl was, to which she had simply replied that she had gone to take a bath. It was not as if it made any difference, since the man always left before the sun even rose. He was a terrible husband, but Serenial only thanked the maid for her care and commented that it seemed she had guessed correctly, since Kallian had already left the castle. Taking advantage of the moment of privacy during the bath, Kina asked why the girl did not go see her uncle, informing her that he had already returned from his work trip, so it would be good for the girl to exchange a few words with him. Certain that if Serenial explained everything that was happening, the Count would not stay idle until it was resolved. And the girl knew she was right. The problem was that, For some reason, she would not reveal to the servant she had no desire at all to do that. She remembered the list the Duke had sent with the names of all the noble investors in her mine, and all of them had some kind of connection to her uncle. On top of all that, he and Kalyan were acting in a very mysterious way. It was even strange. However, even if she did not tell her relative everything, she would certainly discover something. That was why she decided to give in and ask the maid to prepare a visit to the Count's house immediately, something that surprised Kina. However, Serenial explained that it was better to speak with him in person as soon as possible, but the woman scolded her loudly, saying that would not be possible, because our protagonist needed to eat her breakfast at least, since she had not eaten anything since the day before, and she would not let the girl simply leave like that. She needed to eat, especially at a moment like that, so she volunteered to prepare something. Kina's care was surprising. She was almost like a mother to her, and that managed to make our girl smile, even after having cried for so long. She remembered the words of her secret admirer, the Duke, about how she needed to focus on what could be done from then on so as not to feel too powerless, since that feeling only tended to worsen. Now calmer, Serenial knew he was right if she did not want to be defeated by her own emotions. She needed to move forward no matter what, and so she did. She was fully convinced that she was only acting that way because of the Duke. That was why, the next time she saw him, she needed to thank him properly. A thank you that would be sweet and even wistful. It did not take long for her to arrive at her uncle's mansion, and only then did she realize how long it had been since she had last been in her homeland. At that point in the timeline, if she was correct, it had been about 6 months since she got married, so it should not have been that long. However, before she returned to the past, when she had been poisoned and her body was weak, she remembered that she could not even leave the mansion, let alone leave the city. She greeted the servants, and the butler bowed before the girl, saying that it had been quite some time. Bane had taken care of her since she was a child and had not changed his manner with Serenial even after she married, but for some reason she had never been bothered by that. The man invited her to come in right away, as he would prepare some tea for her, something the girl accepted with a sincere smile, a smile she had not given in a long time. She leaned on the arm of the man she trusted so much while he commented that at the moment her uncle was not present, but would return soon, which was not a problem, since she could simply entertain herself with her tea in the meantime. However, Bane asked if they could talk briefly beforehand. That piqued Serenial's interest, and the man began by saying that she might find it strange for him to say something like this. However, he would be very grateful if she considered his words, because what he had to say was very important. The servant glanced around, making sure no one would eavesdrop on the conversation, as a carriage approached, but he managed to say that Serenial should not trust Lord Vedder. That left her somewhat confused, since he was speaking of her uncle, but she knew the butler well enough to know that he would never say something like that without a very good reason. But he did not clear up her doubts right then. He only asked that, after she finished her conversation with her master, she go to the garden where she used to play when she was a child, reiterating that the girl should go alone, since he could not risk anyone discovering the secret he was keeping. Even before she confirmed her presence, Bane explained what would be waiting for her there. At the perfect moment, when the exchange of information had already been arranged, Veter arrived at the palace saying he was very happy to see his niece. The two went inside, and he apologized for having kept the girl waiting, explaining that he had many things to deal with lately and had been busy, but he wanted to know if something was going on, to which the girl replied that no, she just needed to know how her uncle was doing. She knew all of that was a lie. The real reason she had gone to the Count's house was to tell the truth about Kalian and Laray's secret family, but now, for some stupid reason, she could not speak. She remembered Duke Lexian, who surely had discovered what the girl wanted. However, she had this strange feeling that she was heading in the wrong direction with all of this. Now, all that was left was to pretend, so she put a smile on her face and asked how her uncle had been doing, since he always seemed very busy with work. Without much enthusiasm, the man replied that apparently things would stay that way for a while, and he opened a gap to ask about Kalian, and the girl explained that he was the same as always, seeming just as busy as her uncle lately, and she took the opportunity to add one more thing. From then on, she had decided that she would be responsible for delivering the business reports directly to Vetter. Handing him a paper, she explained that it was a summary of the mine's current situation, the sections being excavated, how much was being extracted, the types of ore they had obtained, and their market prices. The man was surprised by how much his niece had done, asking whether the girl had really written all of that by herself, something Serenial confirmed, without knowing why he found that so unusual. Trying to hide it, the Count said he found nothing strange about it, and our girl asserted herself, making it clear that she intended to send reports every 15 days, since she assumed her uncle also needed to stay informed about the entire situation. After all, he had acquired the right to issue taxes and had even secured investors for the family. The old man was not happy at all with his niece's interference, and that was evident in his gaze. But the girl continued her act. saying that Kalyan himself had said that it was her uncle who had been responsible for helping them, and even though she did not know who the investors were, she was very grateful for that. The man seemed surprised and asked if that was really what Kalyan had said. Forcing a smile, he asked whether her husband had said anything else. That last comment made her curious, but all she did was smile, saying that she did not know anything more, only that he had been of great help to him. And that was all he had said. Trying to steer the topic away from the mines, Vedder asked how things were going between the two lovers. And calling them things intrigued Serenial. But the man explained that it had been half a year since the girl had married, so he wanted to know whether there was, by any chance, any good news to share. But that was not the case yet. However, the MC made it clear that he would know if anything happened, and that reminded her of something else. Serenial touched on a delicate topic. The anniversary of her parents' deaths was approaching, and she could not get it out of her head. So she tried to visit the site of the accident, but she ended up finding something very strange. There were some strange people kind of watching the place, and that made her uncle jump out of his chair. But the girl continued, saying that she became curious. So she decided to ask what they were doing, and she received the answer that they were conducting some kind of investigation. Veter asked his niece what she was talking about. What investigation? What were they investigating? So she explained that, apparently, a bandit had appeared in the area recently, and the group explained that they were searching to see if anyone was hiding there. She had even heard that several bandits had been appearing frequently in those parts lately. That was why she suggested that her uncle also be careful when he went out. He was not happy at all with the conversation. There was certainly some involvement in dirty business, but Sereniel was radiant, putting on the best performance of her life as she asked the man to promise that. When the conversation ended, she did exactly what Bane had asked. She was in the garden, frustrated because she had not managed to say anything about Kalyan or even check her suspicions. However, just judging by Veter's reaction when she mentioned the cliff, she knew she had made the right choice by saying nothing. And when she mentioned Kalyan, it seemed as though he was trying to figure out what the girl was thinking about her own husband. That made her remember something very intriguing. She recalled Lexian asking whether she truly believed her parents had died in an accident because she might not be seeing the whole story. If her suspicions were correct, then the person behind all of this could only be one. But her thoughts were cut short when Bane called her. She seemed nervous, worried, insisting that he speak right away about what was going on. She needed to know exactly what had happened there. But the man began to ramble, saying that he was still not sure whether telling her was the right thing to do. However, he also said that he could not risk remaining silent in a situation like that. As someone who had served the Verdelais family for several generations, the honor of that house was his as well. That was why he revealed that Veter's actions had been strange lately. The girl pressed the issue, and so the man replied that he believed she was aware that, unlike the former count, Veter was opposed to the crown. Ever since he became the head of the family, worry had followed Bane day and night. The worry that his master might try to cause some kind of intrigue within high society. But now it was more than just his anxiety speaking. It seemed his fears were about to become reality. Getting straight to the point, the girl asked whether he truly knew nothing. Then the two of them arrived at a small building in the garden, and he asked the girl to see it with her own eyes. Inside, Serenial was full of questions, and the man explained that this was a passage used by the servants. But she remembered that she had been there when she was still a child, and asked whether that path had already existed back then. To which he replied that she might not remember, but that mansion had a basement, which was what they were facing now. The only person who knew of its existence was the former count, but he never needed to use it. Because of that, the room had remained empty for a long time. Serenial asked whether, by a timely moment, he meant that there had never been a situation in which something needed to be hidden, and Bane confirmed it. And he explained that some time ago, the number of visitors to the mansion had begun to increase, and they all had one thing in common. They were all nobles targeted as enemies of the crown. That made Serenial's mouth fall open. Could it be that among them were the Baron of Hillington and the Marquis of Rubem? Names that shone on the list she had received from Lexian. The list the butler was not even supposed to know existed, something he confirmed. And opening one of the doors, he revealed that one day a man who dealt with mercenaries had also come to the place, shocking Serenial completely. They entered the dark room, and Bane assured her that she would understand what he was trying to say as soon as she saw the situation. She would understand what was about to happen when she faced that wall covered in weapons. She could not even count how many things were there. Bane broke the silence, saying that he had spent days agonizing, wondering whether or not he should involve the girl, but deep down he knew he needed to speak to her. That was because he had something very important to say. Since Sereniel was the last of the Verdelais bloodline, she felt betrayed once again. Something else caught her attention, and seeing the girl wandering around the room, the butler called out to her. The protagonist was looking for something, explaining that there was probably an object there, something that had been created to prevent nobles from betraying one another. The list of names. She pulled out a parchment filled with names she had read over and over again. and even a more detailed explanation of the mine's investments. Her uncle had gathered those nobles and ordered them to invest in her mine some time ago, and all of them thought exactly the same way as Vitor. In those papers, there was a contract guaranteeing that the nobles would give all the profits from their investments directly to her uncle. Bane did not know that, and was shocked to hear it, but the girl continued, explaining that he had used the money to buy everything that was in that room, all of those weapons. So the reason so many people had invested in the mine was to secure funds to cause a rebellion. Bane commented that in that case, the girl herself would also be involved. After all, theoretically, she was the owner of the mine, and Lord Vitor was part of her family. Serenial knew that very well. She should already be accustomed to the terror that was betrayal. The Verdelay house, including our protagonist, had followed the crown's orders for several generations, to the point that one could even say the relationship they had was friendly. That was why her uncle chose to hide the truth from her, securing rights to issue taxes and gathering investors. She finally understood. She understood Lexian's words when he suggested that he would be waiting for the day the girl would come to him asking for help. There was one more important thing in that room, a recording stone. Or rather, a replica, because the original was probably hidden somewhere else as a precaution by her uncle. Replicas were objects that shattered after a person watched the recording only once. But the fact that it was stored there in that basement probably indicated that its contents were important. Despite her curiosity, Serenial knew that if she used that opportunity now, the object would break, and her uncle, Kalyan, and anyone else involved in that scheme would know that an intruder had reached the castle. She would certainly be the first suspect. Even so, the man insisted that they watch the memory contained there, because if they let it pass, they might not get another chance. Even if they returned another day, there would be no other way to watch it without breaking that crystal. Serenial decided to trust Bane. She had no reason not to, so she slowly turned the crank, ready to access the memories contained in that crystal sphere. She was seeing a conversation between her uncle and Kalyan, and the old man commented that he had heard an interesting story he wanted to confirm. He wanted to know whether the man sitting in front of him was having an affair with another woman, adding that he had also discovered that the two of them had had a child together. Before Kalyan could even respond, he warned that it would be better not to lie, because he already knew everything. Once again, the protagonist was struck by the shock of yet another betrayal. So her uncle knew everything. He said that making vows was useless, being threatened by Kalyan, who claimed that he knew many things, something that left Vitor intrigued. But the man continued with his smug attitude, mentioning that Serenial's uncle had been responsible for the death of Serenial's parents. That was too much. She could not believe what she was hearing. They spoke of the girl as if she were a pitiful thing, and her current husband said that it was Vitor's men who tied weights to her parents' bodies before throwing them into the carriage. But she knew nothing about any of that, so it would change nothing. To him, Serenial was just a child who would not be able to do anything. And as soon as she was no longer useful to his plan, they could kill her the same way without raising suspicion. The girl was only pulled out of her shock when Bane called her, shouting to warn that someone was approaching the basement. At that moment, the sphere cracked into pieces as the recording's memory had already been fully played. The warning was enough to leave Serenial completely dazed. But worse still, Bane added that the footsteps sounded like Lord Vetter's. The girl became desperate and said that he would kill both of them if they discovered what they were doing there. The butler tried to think rationally, even though he clearly suffered over his decision. And then he turned his back on the girl and went to the door. Serenial screamed, but he continued with his movements. To her surprise, he began pushing the wooden wall that stored the weapons. The girl asked what he was doing until the butler revealed a secret passage, explaining that if she followed it, she would end up reaching several routes. But he advised her to follow a straight line for most of the way. That passage was completely unknown even to Lord Vetter himself, so he wanted Serenial to escape through it, telling her to hurry. However, the MC asked him to wait. She wanted to know what he was going to do and called for the man who had taken care of her for so many years to come with her, because otherwise Bane would be killed. But smiling, trying to hide the pain of his decision, the servant stated that he would not go with her. He had no intention of leaving that place, and staying there would still be able to buy some time for the protagonist. That was even more devastating. He was the first person who had stood by her side since she returned to life, and she did not want to leave him behind. But there was nothing she could do. Bane shouted for her to go faster while he tried to close the door, and he also warned that it was very easy to get lost in there, so he asked her to be careful not to choose the wrong path. She had to keep in mind that she should just go straight. Serenial burst into tears as she shouted for Bane, who left her there with the wall closed. He finally managed to breathe out, for he had saved the girl. He remembered her as a fragile little noble girl, and how Serenial used to spend most of her days locked away in that mansion. Her presence caught the attention of the little protagonist who was resting in the garden, making her laugh immediately. Even though she was the daughter of nobles and isolated from society, she was sweet and wise, and strong enough to face all challenges until the end of her life. Serenial was still the little girl Bane loved as his own daughter, even now that she was an adult, his true mistress. That was why he wanted her to escape safely and return to her days of peace. No sooner said than done. Vidar entered the basement, questioning why his employee was inside there. He definitely should not have been meddling with anything there. On the other side of the wall was Serenial, moving through those dusty, abandoned corridors. She tried to guide herself through the darkness by touch, while her thoughts were entirely focused on the butler, who would certainly die inside that filthy basement, just like her father and her mother. And his fate would be no different. After all, there was no trace of Vidar's perversity. Everything had been completely cleaned up. She remembered the memory she had accessed through the crystal sphere, in which her uncle said that as soon as she was no longer useful, killing her would not be a problem. He proposed a deal to Kalyan. Because the Count needed funds, he offered to secure investors. And in return, his niece's husband would give a percentage of all the mine's profits. With the mine, Kalyan would make a fortune for himself and for his real family. Since their interests were aligned, there was no reason to say anything. However, there was one small condition. That was when he handed the potion to the vile man, explaining that he must never have children with his niece. After all, he himself had already said that he planned to get rid of the protagonist as soon as he had enough money, or at the very least, he would have to do that, or else he would not be able to share the mine. Furthermore, the old man made it clear that he would cooperate, but it would be a huge nuisance if Serenial became pregnant before that, because in that case, her child would inherit the precious mine. So he warned Kalyan that he needed to be careful to have children only with his lover, asking for his word, and the man did not hesitate for even a moment. So it had been Vidar who gave the contraceptive to that scoundrel. She was surrounded by miserable people. She was so immersed in those memories that she did not realize how long it took to reach the exit door, which left her somewhat relieved. But the girl did not know whether that passage led to the castle garden. She opened the door carefully, illuminated by a bright moon. As she stepped outside, she ran into Kina. Seeing someone who was so important to her, and the only person who could shelter her in that situation, made Serenial's eyes fill with tears. She ran to the maid, who was worried as usual. The poor woman tried to comfort the protagonist, who blurted out her words, asking what she should do about Bane. But she was interrupted when Kina asked what had happened to him, because he was the one who had asked her to go to that place if Madame took too long on her visit. That was why she was there. Without giving any context, Serenial said that they could not let Bane die like that. She was ready to save him. She knew she could not do it alone. Now Lexian's words truly made sense. Perhaps it was time to ask for help, but she could not go unprepared. As he had suggested, she was willing to give anything he asked, even her own soul, because she would not leave that situation as it was. The sun was setting in a wonderful orange hue. At the Duke's mansion, he observed everything, reflecting that the seasons of the year were nothing more, nothing less than a change of scenery. Because it did not matter whether he was surrounded by flowers or by bodies covered in blood. In truth, it was all the same. Except that, on that day, things seemed different. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt spring-like, but he quickly corrected himself. It was not the first time. There had been another day when he felt that way. On the day of the debutante ball, as he watched Serenial in her carriage disappearing into the distance, as if the spring breeze were dancing, just like the love in his heart. It had been a long time since he had felt so anxious waiting for someone like that. In fact, he did not even know whether he had ever done so in his life. Perhaps not, especially after he killed his own father and half-brothers who had always oppressed him. His situation worsened even more after he took full control of the House of Rosenwester. No one had ever managed to make him wait like that, like a love-struck adolescent. Only one person could do that, and it was Serenial, stepping down from the carriage in front of his mansion. She had always been the only exception to all the rules the man had. When he opened the door, he commented on his surprise at seeing her, as he had not expected the girl to appear so soon, sooner than even he had anticipated. And then he asked what he always asked whenever the two met. "How have your days been, Serenial Verdelais?" Her eyes, green and deep, reflected his image. But the protagonist went straight to the point. She wanted to ask something. And beforehand, she apologized for the rude way she had decided to visit him, without any request or warning. But he did not care about that, so he simply asked what her question was. The girl began, "You said you would help me, didn't you? Is your offer still standing?" That sounded too good to be true in the man's eyes. The Duke took a sip of his tea before replying. Before setting it down, he said that he had heard the girl had gone to Count Verdelais's mansion the previous day. So, judging by her behavior, something must have happened while she was there. In addition, Lexian had heard rumors that the Count's butler had disappeared as soon as she left her uncle's property. That was why he wanted to know whether that was part of the reason for her visit. She was not exactly surprised, despite the shock, because Duke Lexian knew everything, as always. After all, he had formed very close relationships with merchants to obtain information, so he had probably done the same regarding her. Lexian Rosenwester was known as a god of war, an unbeatable killer. And even though he was the product of an affair outside of marriage, the man had killed all his half-brothers and taken control of the House of Rosenwester. But it was frightening to think that, aside from the things everyone already knew about him, Serenial had no idea who the man in front of her truly was. What kind of person was he? How did he know so much? Why did he want to help her? She felt completely in the dark. Above all, what she questioned most was whether she could even trust him. The problem was that Serenial was not in a position to negotiate an alliance right now, so she asked for his help. There was no other way to do anything without that man by her side. Being direct, the girl asked Lexian to marry her, and that truly caught him by surprise. He knew she would want help, but he did not expect her to go that far. Wanting to be sure of what he had heard, the man asked what she had said, to which she replied that, as he knew, her life was currently in danger, and in order to live, she had to find a way to leave the Viscount's house forever. Now he understood clearly what Serenial meant. She wanted his help to divorce Kalyan, not to marry him. And moving closer to the girl, he commented that she knew her uncle would not allow that to happen, because the two were firmly bound by a mutual interest, which had grown even stronger after Kalyan began mining. Since the mines were heavily taxed, and it was Vetter who had helped him secure a reduction in those taxes, which meant the man must be swimming in rivers of profit, the girl exploded, explaining that her new goal was not simply to survive. What she wanted was to reclaim the mine from Kalyan's hands, and she would not allow Vetter to stand in the way of that. This was new to Lexian, but the protagonist explained that she wanted to make the two men who had betrayed her pay for their terrible actions. Of course, she would handle that part carefully so as not to cause any greater trouble for poor Lexian. But for now, what she needed to do was ensure her own safety. And that would be possible if she became a duchess, right? However, secretly, the girl knew that was not exactly why she was asking for Duke Lexian's hand. The truth was that if he truly wanted to help, as he had said on the day they met at the edge of an abyss, if he was willing to trust her, then he would surely listen kindly to such a sudden request from her. Of course, anyone seeing the situation from the outside might consider it all a grand bargain, but this was the only way the girl had to test how far Duke Lexian would go just to help her. And in return, she would promise that the man would receive something very advantageous in exchange. That surprised him a little. So there really was something good in it for him? The girl was a natural strategist and argued that, just as Vetter and Kalyan had done, it would be very beneficial for them to form a relationship based on mutual interest, something that greatly interested Lexian. Finally, she revealed something no one else knew. Magical minerals would soon begin to be extracted from the mine. He must already know the high value of those minerals, and she made it clear that she would share all the profits with him. That way, he would lose nothing. However, coldly, the man asked whether she truly thought he would agree to such an absurd plan. Because of money? Was that all the girl had to offer? His response left Serenial more than confused. What did he mean? He did not want money? It was a lot of money. But the man explained that his interest was not in the mine at all. Trying to distance herself a little from him, the girl ended up tripping over her own feet, only to be saved by the strong arms of that man who was so unexpectedly gentle. He took advantage of the closeness of their faces to comment that he thought the girl was, at the very least, sincere with her own husband. Then he asked what the true reason was for the MC to go so far just to obtain a divorce. But he was right, she was sincere. The problem was that our girl no longer loved Kalyan Helkar. Trying to steady herself, the girl made it clear that people's hearts could change, and that was all that had happened. In fact, she was not asking for the two of them to remain married forever. Just 1 year would be enough for her to finish her preparations. After that, she would agree to divorce him without any issues and would cooperate 100%. That was why she asked once again and pleaded. But before she could finish, the man interrupted her, saying that she did not seem to understand how an agreement worked. Because what mattered in an exchange was not what she could offer, but what the other party wanted. And turning to the girl, he decided to propose something else. He would cooperate, yes, with her plan regarding the divorce, regarding her uncle, and if she wanted anything else afterward, he could find a way to obtain it. For example, he could take on the reputation of a terrible man who seduced a poor married woman just to save her honor among the nobility. However, in return, he wanted something from Serenial that was non-negotiable. He had 2 demands. First, she had to completely get rid of that useless man, Kalyan. That came as a surprise because the man spoke almost as if he cared about her well-being. But second, and most important, the marriage the two of them would enter into had to last forever. In other words, she would be his, and his alone. The trip back home was, to say the least, tense. The two shared the carriage, and Lexian could not help commenting on how disturbed the protagonist seemed, asking whether they had not made a mutual agreement and whether perhaps she already regretted it now that she realized how high the price of her silence was. But that was not it. Taking advantage of the opening, the Duke reminded her that she had asked several times why he wanted to help. Now the answer was simple. It was because she was someone who meant a great deal to him. Those words made no sense at all in Serenial's mind. She had only seen that man once in her life, Or at least she thought so. But she decided to take the risk, asking whether, by any chance, the Duke of Rosenwester had genuine feelings for her. That is, was he saying those things about her in a more romantic sense? Before he could answer, the girl made it clear that she had no intention whatsoever of trusting anyone ever again in her life, especially if that person had feelings for her. She had learned in the worst possible way what came from giving blind and foolish trust to anyone. She would not let that happen again. However, to her surprise, Lexian replied that he did not remember asking her to trust him. After all, it was not as if trust were something you could obtain just by asking. But he was serious, and although he did not say this to Serenial, he knew he could make her much happier than that idiot of a husband she had, and that was why he wanted her to accept him. If words alone could change the world, he would have been in a far more favorable place long ago. However, all he said was that, for now, he would grant all of the girl's requests. Not that it was particularly difficult for him. He even suggested that they keep their marriage under one condition. If, after 1 year, she did not trust him even a little bit, she could do whatever she wanted. That surprised Serenial. He was giving her more than a condition. He was giving her the freedom of a marriage that was supposed to last forever. To ensure her safety, the man asked her to get out of the carriage a little before reaching his own mansion. But he asked her to promise one thing. From that moment on, he could be a point of support for her, so no one would hurt the protagonist. He had even already placed his men to keep an eye on anyone who might harm her, so she should not worry so much about her safety. He only wished for the girl to live in peace without any fear. But in any case, she would probably be moving into the Rosenwester mansion soon enough, and he would take care of everything, even the arrangements for the wedding day. When Sereniel tried to argue that he did not need to do that, Lexion insisted, assuring her that it would be far more extravagant than the first one, for he would never allow the shadow of some ex-husband to haunt his wife. But of course, that was a trivial matter. There was something far more crucial in all of this, and extending his hand, he managed to leave the girl completely speechless. He had stepped down from the carriage just to help her down the stairs. He was completely fallen for the girl. But Lexion explained that, since they were doing this, they had to put on a little show. A show in which the news of her divorce and new marriage would completely crush her uncle, Kalyan, and his useless lover. I love this guy. 2 days later, Kalyan bursts into Serenial's office, shouting at the top of his lungs, yelling her name repeatedly, saying that something horrible had happened. But the girl does not even flinch, simply continuing to read her book calmly, before carefully placing it under the desk and asking what he was talking about. Desperate, her husband replies that the night before, a terrible accident had occurred at the mine. When the MC asked if anyone had been hurt, he replied that there had been a major explosion that caused a serious accident. The mention of an explosion made the protagonist suspicious. The man comments that it was very strange because before they began operations, they had experts inspect everything to make sure it was all safe. So he had no idea how something like that could have happened, especially so suddenly. In addition, he reveals that someone from the Imperial Palace appeared shortly afterward, and that person ordered all operations inside the mine to be halted and the site to be evacuated as quickly as possible. This makes our girl thoughtful, while her husband completely loses it, questioning how this could have happened and why everything was going wrong so suddenly. Now the girl was finally understanding what was happening before her eyes, what all of this truly meant, and who was controlling the entire situation. She looks at Kalyan without the slightest pity on her face and with no concern whatsoever. 2 days earlier, when Lexion said they should put on a show about their relationship, the man explained that despite how he was perceived by society, he was someone with very firm values in the art of performance, warning that the opening act should begin within a few days, informing his new scene partner that Kalyan would likely burst into her room in desperation, burning with rage, and that if the girl were smart enough, she would know how to handle the entire situation, asking her to make the most of the new play the two of them would build together. Now there she was, seeing that everything Duke Lexion had said was happening exactly as he had predicted. The girl asks Kalyan to calm down. She was upset to hear about the accident, but it was nothing they could not work around. Her husband could not understand how she could be so calm. After all, they would have to share all the profits with the investors, including the girl's own uncle. She remains serene as she asks whether they had not managed to accumulate money all this time, something Kalyan confirms in a trembling voice. Then the protagonist informs him that she had even calculated the accumulated revenue up to that point, and with the current balance, they could remain safe for a few more months. The man's face was blank. Even so, she did not back down, suggesting that if he did not want to use that money, there was another option. But unfortunately, they would have to give up the village they owned to do that, the village where his child lived. The man scolds her, hiding behind the fact that he had bought that village for the girl, so it would not be good for her to give it up without them even being able to enjoy it. But Serenial does not pay much attention to that, saying that it really was a shame, especially considering the fact that the two of them had never even set foot there together. But the girl did not care about that. All that interested her was being able to provide some support and sustain her husband, who approaches, saying that he wanted to make a request. He argues that, since she was the original owner of the mine, he would like her to contact the Imperial Palace and confirm that safety inspections would be conducted before they began extracting more minerals, or they would have to redo everything, which would only prolong the investigation process. This was manipulation like no other, and Serenial knew it well. Our girl was no longer a fool, remembering how her husband and Lorraine had mocked her, saying that she could not even understand how her own business worked. And even so, she had trusted her husband enough to have the reports delivered directly to her. Putting on her best pose of a woman in love, she says that she understands Kellyanne's point and assures him that she would contact the Empire promptly. However, despite acknowledging that she knew nothing about that business, she makes it clear that there was one thing she knew very well, and that was that, in any situation, the safety of her workers had to come first. For that reason, she asked her husband to personally ensure the inspections at the mine, since she had asked the Imperial Palace to conduct a very thorough inspection this time, asking him to see it as an opportunity to take a vacation, something the man needed, and perhaps a good opportunity for the two of them to go to the village. But that suggestion was enough to leave Kellyanne completely terrified. Even so, the protagonist continued pretending to be innocent, standing up and saying that she would take care of fulfilling his request. More than ever, she remembered the words of her new ally, saying that if she were smart enough, she would know how to deal with the situation and should make the most of it. She knew it was not a bad idea to pretend to be just an innocent wife. After all, anything was better than returning to that miserable position of being a victim of the perverse woman who had been her best friend. Meanwhile, at Duke Lection's mansion, he was speaking with his servants, giving an order for them to hurry and carry it out while maintaining the utmost discretion, and then he announces his departure, leaving the man alone with his thoughts. On the night the two of them sealed an agreement, the girl made a point of asking one more small thing. She wanted to know what had happened to the Verdelais family's servant, Bane. In that situation, Lexian warned that he could begin the search immediately, but it might already be too late. Still, that did not matter. Serenial at least wanted to know whether the body could be found. And if that were the case, she would very much like her future husband to give him a proper burial. That would not be a problem, as long as she explained something to him. He asks why Vetter had placed a target on the butler's back, to which the girl replies that she had gone to the basement with Bane and had found a recording stone. This surprises Lexian, who becomes increasingly interested in the story. The girl explains that it contained all the conversations between Kellyanne and Vetter, including everything the Duke had said. So that was what she wanted. He had finally understood the motivations behind Serenial asking for his help. Finally, he asks what happened to the recording stone, and the girl explains that after watching it, she herself broke it, because it was only a replica. Then the girl took the cracked object back to her house. This leaves Lexian somewhat intrigued, and he asks why the MC decided to do that, to which our girl replies that Bane was still locked in that basement. So if she left the broken recording stone there, they could not deny any involvement. However, if it looked like someone had stolen it, she might be able to buy some time for the man. Her attitude surprises the Duke of Rosenwester, but he acknowledges that the protagonist was right. After all, her uncle suspected anyone at the blink of an eye, so he likely would not kill his servant until he was absolutely certain. Therefore, if the recording stone had been discovered, he could have been killed right there. In short, now that he knew this, things would become a bit more complicated. His thoughts revolved solely around Serenial. The man received Paul at his mansion, commenting that he had arrived at the perfect moment and that he had summoned him because he needed to share something with him, and he needed the merchant to fix the situation. For that reason, he wanted a new carriage, a large and very comfortable carriage. This leaves the man intrigued. Why would he want such a large carriage all of a sudden? But enigmatically, the man explains that he could no longer stand remaining in the situation he was in with his current carriage. He remembered Serenial during that trip when their knees had touched the entire time. She had looked almost like a frightened kitten. Meanwhile, in the village, Lorraine was screaming, wanting to know what the hell her lover had said. She could not believe it, and Kellyanne tried to apologize. But the woman screamed even louder, asking what exactly he had done. The man explains that he had no choice and that his official wife had manipulated him. He had not expected her to simply show up like that, but Lorraine pointed her finger at him, saying that he needed to stop Serenial from getting things her way. Because even if the two of them left for a while, where would they go? Worried, he massages his lover's shoulders, asking her to calm down. Otherwise, she would wake their child. The woman with intensely red hair was burning with rage inside. She no longer had the slightest patience for Serenial, and now even regretted not having killed her earlier. Her eyes burned with hatred. After all, that spoiled girl always did the same thing. She put an innocent, stupid expression on her face, said even stupider things, got in her way, and honestly drove her insane. Kellyanne, on the other hand, was genuinely worried about his wife waking Benny. He explains that he had already found a place near the city where the two of them could stay safely. Guaranteeing that he would visit them every day, he asks them to just enjoy the day and leave the next day. But that does not calm Lorraine. Quite the opposite. The girl turns around with a dark expression on her face, asking if that meant he would stay at the house with his wife, living under the same roof as Serenial, after abandoning her and Benny like that. The woman smiles like a psychopath, saying that the unloved woman must be very happy to finally be able to spend some time with her beloved husband. Continuing his failed attempt to calm that unhinged madwoman, Kalyan asks her not to worry, because the only person who mattered to him was her herself. More serious than ever, she squeezes her lover's neck, ordering him to behave. He had never seen the woman like that, but she is firm in saying that if she heard even a single rumor about the two of them together, she would not let it slide. The next day, the carriage was waiting outside the protagonist's mansion. She was amazed by the new vehicle, along with Kina. It was huge and very luxurious, but the maid wanted to know who had sent such a pompous gift. That was when Serenial realized. When she had needed to share the other carriage with the man, Lexion had asked whether the vehicle was perhaps too small for her, adding that he would probably have to buy another one if they were really going to get married. That put a discreet smile at the corner of our girl's mouth. Without saying much, she explains to Kina that she would soon find out who had sent it and calls her to get inside. She had received a letter saying that she must be busy, but inviting her to visit his property, as he would like to know her opinion about some work Lexion had been doing. Besides that, there was something he wanted to show Serenial. When they arrived at the Rosenwester mansion, the maid was a little surprised. She wanted to know what exactly they were doing there, when her mistress explained that Duke Rosenwester had agreed to help her. That took her even more by surprise, but very seriously, the girl explains that she already knew she could not trust anyone around her. Even so, the woman brings up the bad reputation Lexion had in the kingdom. To her misfortune, he was close by, saying that he was curious, to know what kind of person Kina thought he was, encouraging the maid to speak honestly, or perhaps her servant could answer the question. The comment was enough to make Kina regret every word she had said. She gets tangled in her own words, trying to explain that she had not meant to say anything. Trying to save the poor girl, Serenial steps in, apologizing and explaining that Kina was a maid who had spent a long time taking care of her, and she had only said those things because she was worried, but asked him to forgive her. The maid lowers her head, apologizing as well and explaining that she did not mean to offend him. That whole reaction was a little offensive, and the man comments that he was not going to cut Kina's head off or anything like that. Ending the matter, he calls the women inside. And he also comments that her lack of trust in other people was not a bad thing. It could even help her stay away from traps. In silence, they walk through the immense corridors of that mansion. The last time Serenial had been there, she had been busy with other things and ended up not noticing how gloomy Leo's house was. Before she could comment on anything out loud, the man explains that no one else lived there anymore. Those who had not moved elsewhere had died, which should not exactly be a surprise, right? After all, when an illegitimate son like him became the head of a house, it was not hard to guess what happened. But it was strange to see someone talk about such a cruel subject as if it were nothing. Perhaps it was a natural talent of the man. In any case, what mattered most to her was where they were going. They had reached almost the back of the house, and Serenial wondered what could be so important as to be so hidden. Finally, they seemed to have arrived at their destination. Before opening the door, Lexion comments that he does not remember whether he had said it or not, but informs her that he had planted his men in various places, including the Verdale property, and that he had managed to help Bane escape. Serenial's eyes fill with tears when she sees that he is alive. Being honest, Lexion states that when they managed to rescue him, he was almost on his way out, but he was still breathing. Indeed, the butler's condition was terrible. He was bandaged everywhere and lying in bed. The girl cries in his arms, apologizing for having left him behind and for failing to save him, while Kina remained stunned. But Bane did not know what she was talking about, because Lexion had informed him that it was she who had asked for them to find him. That is, if it were not for the protagonist's kindness, he would be dead now. For that reason, he asked her not to cry. He even took the opportunity to make it clear that he was also very grateful to the Duke, who asks him not to thank him, because this was something that would benefit him as well. Explaining that he also needed a butler and had heard very good things about Bane, about how he had served his wife for a long time. He should be able to help her adapt when she moved houses. This news catches both servants completely unprepared, and Kina bombards the girl with questions. What do you mean, wife? What did that mean? And was this really true? A little awkwardly, the protagonist confirms the words of her new husband. But Kina did not understand what was happening. For Lexion, however, it was simple. Serenial would adopt a new surname and, consequently, a new husband. In addition, her butler and her maid would work on a new property. The girl reaffirms her words and reminds the two of them that they knew what was shown in the image from the crystal sphere she had used. Because of that betrayal, she planned to take back everything that was hers by right. The Verdale house, the mine, everything. But she could not do it alone. Worried, Bane asks whether it would not be better to simply leave the Empire and move somewhere else. However, the girl makes it clear that this was a choice she had already made, which worried the man greatly. He knew that satisfied look in Duke Rosenwester's eyes, because he had seen those eyes several years ago, and he still remembered the day he had met him for the first time. He had been walking quickly through the mansion garden when the boy was still just a child, hidden in the shadows of the garden, peeking through Serenial's window. Even in the dark, it was clear. The look of desire and the flushed cheeks the boy had. His eyes showed how hopelessly in love he was. The only thing the butler did not know was whether this would be good for the two of them. He did not know if it was honest to say that this would be for the best. After that conversation, which was at the very least awkward, it was time for Serenial to return. But before that, the man calls Kina's attention, who immediately goes on alert. He asks her to do her job properly in the other mansion before his fiancée moved there. She did not know exactly what he meant, so Lexian makes it clear that he was asking her to stay alert in the same way she had been earlier when she suspected him, something Kina would do without thinking twice. The man knew that his future wife would be safe if her servant remained vigilant, especially at such a delicate moment. Serenial steps into their conversation, asking him not to worry, as she would never be able to find a maid as careful as Kina. Before leaving, she calls out to Duke Rosenwester, thanking him for having saved Bane and for caring about her and her well-being. That was the first time anyone had thanked him for anything, and Lexian could not let that pass. But the girl simply reaffirms that she truly was flattered, her eyes shining with gratitude. The two acted like a truly loving couple. Lexian's eyes were lost in the depth of Serenial's beauty, and he could not hold back a small smile before asking what she thought of the work he had done so far. And being honest, the girl confesses that she did not expect him to do so much in so little time, unlike her current husband, who was useless. A bit grim, the man reveals that he had thought about causing the explosion inside the mine while Kalian was still in there, which takes both the maid and the protagonist by surprise, though it would have been very anticlimactic. Laughing, the girl comments that he had asked to help speed up the inspection the Empire was conducting at the mine. Indeed, he was quite shameless. But the girl soon says that she had said she did not know much about business, only that safety should always come before anything else. That was why she said she would ask for an even more rigorous inspection, leaving no stone turned the wrong way. Leo's eyes widen at that. The girl was not innocent after all, and he assures her that he would pass his orders along to conduct a very meticulous inspection, something the girl asks with all her charm that he truly do. He remembered how he had felt watching the loving couple from afar. He saw Serenial smiling at someone who was not him, and that made him jealous. But not now. Now those green, shining eyes were focused only on him. That beautiful smile and Serenial's gentle manner were directed at Leo. He thought about approaching the girl but ended up freezing, and changed the subject, saying that Kalian had bought a new house near the property of the two of them, which indicated that he was probably thinking of moving Lorray and his son there. Thinking about that, he suggested that Serenial have Kina make any purchases she needed outside the two of them while they were there, because he imagined that the protagonist did not want to run into the happy family. The next morning, despite everything the Duke had said, the girl did not feel the need to avoid the two traitors. After all, she had already seen them once and was now completely desensitized. Kina asks where they were going this time, to which Serenial replies that she had some business to take care of at the market, but warns that she would not be going to the Duke's property, so she did not need to worry about that. They comment on the wonderful weather that day as they wandered around the city center, until the maid decided to start a conversation about Duke Rosenwester, commenting that she did not think he was a bad person after all, something that surprised her mistress a little. The woman explains that when she heard the rumors about him, she thought she would lose her mind right then and there. But instead, the man merely commented that her distrust could be useful to Serenial, and even praised her, something that made her very happy. In addition, he also saved Bane, who personally told the maid everything that had happened to him. Even while his life was at risk, he continued pretending not to know anything about what was going on in that basement, so the Count's men beat him until he almost died. After he lost consciousness, someone removed his body from the basement, and that was all Bane knew. Serenial knew it could only have been the work of someone planted by the Duke in the Verdelay mansion, but that would not be good for Lexian. And now that Bane had disappeared, her uncle would certainly grow suspicious of the Duke as well. The two continued their walk, and the woman commented that she was still uneasy about the marriage between the two of them, but her mistress interrupted her, saying that it was just a deal and nothing more than that, so there was no need to worry. She certainly did not believe it, but she tried at all costs to convince herself that what she and Lexian had, or would have, was nothing more than a business agreement. She finally arrived at the bank, receiving a report from one of the employees. As she analyzed it, she had a question. She wanted to know whether they also stored people's valuables there. She needed to know exactly where Kalian hid the mine's profits. She was sure it had been at the bank, but even though he was useless, she knew her husband was not stupid enough to do it in his own name, which meant he must have used Lorray's name. The man confirms it, but explains that due to very strict palace regulations, It was necessary for the owner to give a good description of the item to be stored. That answer was good enough for the girl to conclude that her uncle must not have stored the real crystal sphere there, in that case. After taking care of that, they went to another place. And the girl arrived already thanking the shop owner for having analyzed the tea flowers she had sent a long time ago, as it had been of great help. She had gone there to give him a better payment as a reward, and also to ask for something else. She needed a detailed report of the drink's ingredients. In addition, she wanted the little box with the petals back. The man accepts everything without questioning. That was the power of money. Worried, Kina asks when her mistress intended to turn those two over to the police, but she still did not give a deadline, only said that, when the time came, she would do it, warning that right now it was still far too early. She knew that if she spoke to the Imperial Police about what her husband and best friend had done now, the situation would not be completely resolved. Of course, they would face the accusation of a very serious crime. But the girl did not want revenge just for that. And who knew how long the police investigation would take? Not only that, but knowing Lorraine, she must already have prepared herself to escape blame from such an accusation. Always cunning, the girl knew very well that Lorraine was no fool. So Serenial intended to strike at the right moment when no one would be able to believe the lies or excuses of those two. It would be at that moment that the protagonist would emerge victorious and expose them both. Even though some time had already passed since what happened, the maid could not help feeling angry and wondering how Lorraine had the courage to try to poison Serenial. After all, the only reason the woman managed to leave that orphanage and live the life she had now was because of the boundless kindness of the former count. Without him, who knew where Lorraine would be now? She only stopped talking when something on the street caught her attention, and consequently, her reaction caught Serenial's attention. The woman tried to shield her when the protagonist turned to look for the cause of such indignation, but it was no use. The scene she saw was disgusting. Kina's anger turned into concern for her mistress's feelings. That was because the perfect Margarine ad family was strolling through the city center. Of course, she should not have been so surprised to run into them, but they had a lot of nerve to appear like that, together, in broad daylight. Lorraine was carefree when she suddenly turned, startled. Kalyan asks what had happened, only to jump in surprise when he found his wife there. She greets the two of them, saying how good it was to see her great friend. Kalyan was visibly horrified, while the red-haired girl tried to disguise in a comical way the fact that she had been caught red-handed, in a tone that those two idiots would never be able to decipher. Serenial comments that it seemed it had taken them a while to finish packing their things, making a small reference to the fact that her husband was returning to their shared property with Lorraine once again. Awkwardly, Kalyan confirms it. Her traitorous friend was burning with rage at that interaction, which, in her eyes, was covered in affection. But she did not have much time to feel jealous, because the protagonist asked who the child accompanying them was, a question that hit her squarely. To make matters worse, the girl also asked whether her husband knew the child, while the little boy tried to hide himself in the hem of his mother's skirt. With the nerve of a shameless man, Kalyan said he had no idea who the boy was. He truly did not. And that answer, even though it had a reason behind such a lie, stressed Lorraine out. The woman was trembling and the little boy looked lost, until he finally spoke up, drawing Serenial's attention. Because he had just called Kalyan daddy, that was enough to unsettle the man, and the protagonist kept her face impassive. There was no way to read what she was feeling at all. Trying to save himself from that awkward situation, the man commented that he had heard the boy did not have a father and therefore called any adult man that. That made Lorraine instinctively smile. Even so, Kalyan did not stop, saying that a rumor had reached his ears about her taking care of the boy because he had nowhere else to go. Serenial pretended to believe that story, offering a small sideways smile, before commenting on how kind her friend was. After all, that boy was an orphan, and she took the opportunity to poke directly at her wound, adding that her friend knew very well the kind of pain a child like him faced, which was why she could not simply ignore it. Taking advantage of the opening, the girl also commented that her friend must be looking for someone to sponsor the boy and offered herself, explaining that although the mining expeditions were suspended for now, she could still contribute and provide support. Lorraine could not believe the audacity she had to say something like that to her, and how Kalyan managed to keep hiding behind Serenial. That made Lorraine wonder whether he would actually abandon her and Benny like that. It was pitiful. In a quick movement, she squeezed the little boy's hands, asking what she had said. What did she mean by poor thing? That was just another confirmation that the protagonist had always looked at her as someone inferior, but she would not let her son be treated that way, only over her dead body. And even then, smiling, Lorraine said that there was no need to do that. Realizing that the woman was on the verge of a mental breakdown, Kalyan intervenes, finally calling his official wife to return home at once, with the excuse that he had remembered something urgent he needed to take care of. He was pulling her very aggressively, to the point that the girl screamed, until she heard a very familiar voice saying that it was good to see her there, a voice everyone knew very well. Our dear Duke of Rosenwester greets Kalyan Helkar, The situation was, to say the least, awkward, and the man intervened in the violence being inflicted on his future wife, lightly slapping the coward's hands to separate him from Sereniel. He apologizes, but explains that he had some business to discuss with her. The so-called happy couple had no idea why he was there, and they wondered how long the man had been watching that entire situation unfold. A little frightened, Kellyanne asks what kind of business it was that he could only discuss with Sereniel. Then he explains that he had just returned from the Imperial Palace, where he had attended a meeting about the situation of Sereniel's mine, informing them that the investigation there would begin immediately and would be very, very cautious to ensure that no other accidents happened in the future. That did not make the facade couple happy at all. To top it off, he mentions the things Sereniel had already told him. The inspection would take time to be concluded, but safety had to be the priority. And he even asked whether Kellyanne did not agree, and of course he had to. Lexian also informs him that, depending on the results of that expedition, the tax exemption the man had received would be annulled if there were anything wrong regarding workplace safety. In addition, he wanted to inform them that the palace staff would need a report with the history of all the minerals extracted from there and the transactions carried out as well. However, it seemed that Sereniel had already prepared that. The fact that he spoke to her directly in front of her husband surprised the girl a little, and Kellyanne seemed intimidated, as he intervened, saying that he would deliver all the reports himself, justifying it with the fact that he had been responsible for managing the mine alone. However, Lexian explains that that would not be necessary, terrifying his rival. And it would not be necessary because the owner of that mine was Sereniel Verdelais. The mention of her name causes astonishment once again, but the girl does not react this time. Bringing that terrible interaction to an end, he extends his hand to the girl and asks her to accompany him, since they still needed to discuss business. Kellyanne shouts for them to wait, but the Duke does not pay him any attention and takes the opportunity to jab at the idiot, informing him that he himself had been assigned to conduct the investigation. That was yet another thing the man had not expected. He even tried to argue, but now it was already useless. Deep down, Lorraine did not look happy either. To drop one last bomb, the Duke commented that the little boy in the woman's arms looked quite a lot like Kellyanne, as if he were his own son. Here he killed the guy and buried him, right? And once again, ignoring the happy family as always, he led Sereniel away. The maid was impressed by that attitude. The man had put Kellyanne in his proper place without even needing to do anything violent. She liked him quite a lot. Apparently, he was not a bad person after all. While they shared some tea, the protagonist commented that she was embarrassed by the fact that the man had witnessed that whole mess. But he did not know why she felt that way. After all, the ones doing something wrong were Kellyanne and Lorraine, so she had nothing to be ashamed of. He already knew that man was unhinged, but now he was sure he was a bastard. Who could imagine he was that much of a coward? Which made Sereniel realize that he had been observing the interaction from the very beginning. He makes it clear, however, that he was not following them on purpose. But what mattered most to the young man was knowing whether the protagonist was all right. And Sereniel explains that she was, but admits that she did not expect the two of them to go out together like that during the day. Perhaps she had been too naive. Lexian shifts the focus to the woman, Lorraine, and comments that she looked like an ordinary woman. But the way she looked at Sereniel reminded him of the looks he used to receive on a bloody battlefield, for they were loaded with the intent to kill. The protagonist comments that maybe it was a matter of social status difference, but she had always had an inferiority complex toward her ever since they were children. Even so, Sereniel had always made it clear that she thought of Lorraine as a true friend, but earlier she ended up realizing that perhaps she had been mistaken all this time. While they were still on the street, she chose to say several things that would hurt deeply, and it left a bittersweet taste in her mouth. But at the same time, Lexian did not understand. After all, it was Lorraine who had attacked first. So he thought Sereniel had only given her what she deserved. So why would he be wrong? He even ventured to say that staying quiet would have been even more naive, a surprise to the protagonist. Trying to lighten the mood a bit, he comments that, anyway, that brat had helped the two of them quite a lot. Soon, rumors would begin to spread. That was new to the girl. What did he mean? Rumors? Lexian clarifies, saying that some scandalous rumors, ones people could not resist, would start circulating around, and he whispers in the girl's ear to make sure no one else would hear. After all, since those two had given them a great opportunity, it was better to take advantage of it. Sereniel feels awkward at that move from the Duke, but as always, he changes the subject, asking what the girl was going to do next week. To which she replies that since the operations at the mine were paused, she would probably stay on her own property, splitting her time with Kellyanne. But that was not what he meant. He wanted to know what she was going to do for her birthday. Being honest, before all this mess, Kellyanne, Lorraine, and she were going to have dinner together as usual and share a simple little cake. But now it was different. The girl was not even a little inclined to be poisoned on her own birthday. Lexian looks at her in silence, before suggesting that she invite all the nobles she knew, including that despicable woman. For Sereniel would have a huge party on her birthday, something that leaves her confused. Apparently, it was already a habit of the Duke to come up with such enigmatic ideas. But he stands firm, telling her to send invitations to anyone she had ever met as well. The problem was that the girl did not know any nobles personally, but that did not matter, for the Duke assures her that they would do anything to show up on such an important day. Everyone in the Empire would do so, without a doubt. After assuring her that everyone in the Empire would do the possible and the impossible to attend her party, the man said that she could even expect it. Sereniel could not understand why he was saying that, but what interested her more, Wasu, was how he knew. How did he know it was her birthday? Because she did not remember mentioning it in any of their conversations. Lexian falls silent, thoughtful, before revealing that he knew much more about her than she thought, giving a sideways smile. And her birthday was just one of those things. 2 days later, just as Duke Rosenwester had said, that intriguing and sensational rumor spread throughout the Empire, capturing everyone's attention, including Sereniel's uncle, who could think of nothing but how much of an idiot Kalyan was. His hatred was so great that he shattered his wine glass, completely staining the letter. He could not believe those words. It was Sereniel who had sent him the news about the mine explosion and explained that they would have to conduct a rather lengthy safety inspection. However, with a certain cynicism in her words, she asked him not to worry, as she was sure they would resume operations safely soon. But there was one more detail she could not forget. She informed him that she had reviewed the documents she had received from her husband and recalculated the total revenue. She commented that she knew the amount Vetter received every month was a fixed percentage of the profits, but she had not yet been informed of exactly how much it should be. Therefore, she asked him to wait a little longer to receive the payment for that month and to inform her how much money she should send. She included at the end a full revenue history with dates for reference. The Count clenched the paper in rage. He could not believe that that bastard Kalyan had left him exposed like that. Those numbers his niece had sent were completely different from the ones he had previously handed over to him. He remembered the last time he had gone there, delivering the share of the profits in cash. After all, it was Sereniel's uncle who had secured all the investors for the mine and obtained the tax incentives. In return, he was supposed to receive 40% of all the profit the mine generated, but based on the numbers his niece had sent, he was receiving much, much less. Not that he did not expect that idiot to pull something like that on him, but he was still outraged. On top of that, he wanted to understand how that explosion had happened out of nowhere. To make matters worse, the person responsible for that damned inspection was none other than Lexian Rosenwester. The Emperor must surely have noticed some irregularity there. And even with all that shit happening, that idiot Kalyan was wandering around and getting himself involved in scandals at such a critical moment. Speaking of him, back at the mansion, the man remained nervous, almost chewing on his fingers from anxiety. He knocks on his wife's door, saying they needed to talk urgently. The man was more insistent than ever, even begging, which was surprising, since politeness was hardly his strong suit. When she allowed him inside, he almost cried with relief. He opened the door to find Sereniel sitting there, serious, asking what had happened, but the man was clear in saying that she had already heard the rumors. So he was curious as to why she had not come to talk to him yet. He had only decided to sleep in separate rooms since the whole thing had exploded. All he wanted was a chance to explain himself. But for the girl, there was no explanation. Kneeling before her, the man begged, swearing on his own life that those rumors were completely nonsense. After all, she knew him better than anyone. He was Kalyan Helkar, after all, her first and only husband, who had only had eyes for her since they were just children. But the protagonist was no longer falling for that. He continued humiliating himself, saying that, besides that, he had always been by her side in desperate moments, so there was no reason for him to betray her. It was absurd. Kalyan confessed that he did not know who had started those rumors, but what he was trying to say was that she should give a vote of confidence to the man she knew so well, and he begged her for it. But reality was very different. The problem was that the man she thought she knew had never existed in the first place. She would not say that now to that disgusting idiot who was still kneeling before her like a criminal, which was exactly what he was. When Sereniel finally uttered Kalyan's name, it tasted bitter in her mouth. Even so, she asked whether he loved her. The man's reaction was as expected. He asked what she meant by that, but the girl stood firm and repeated the question. She needed to know whether he truly, genuinely loved her. Finally, he answered that yes, he had always loved her and still did, because nothing had changed. And rubbing his face against the protagonist's delicate hands, he confessed that he had always felt he was not good enough for her. So he worked even harder to gain her uncle's approval. He took the opportunity to apologize, acknowledging that he had neglected her lately under the excuse that he was only working hard to be a good provider. But in the end, he had hurt her. That performance deserved an Oscar. All the girl replied was that she was feeling very tired. She thought that if that man had stopped lying to her, if he had told the truth and at least pretended to ask for her forgiveness, maybe she would have felt a little better than she did now, or hated less the man she had loved so much. But now it was too late, and the girl stood up saying that she needed to sleep. Perhaps she had only let him in because she wanted to hear his lies to become even more resolute in her decision. Now, completely distant, the girl suggested that perhaps it was time for him to sleep as well, leaving him confused. He panicked, shouting that he was the same person she had known before, that his feelings had not changed, but he promised to change his behavior, especially now that the mining operations had ended. He could spend more time by his wife's side, feeling that those stupid rumors would disappear before the girl even realized it. What made her stop walking was the comment the man made about Serenial's birthday, saying that they should spend it together in their village. He would even take care of all the preparations, and all Serenial would have to do was show up. But the protagonist turned around, refusing the offer and explaining that she would be having a birthday party that year. That caught him by surprise. It was not really his wife's way of acting, but the woman knew how to take advantage of the situation, explaining that he said he would prove his love to her, so it would be best to invite all the nobles to the party and clear up the rumors personally. Besides, they would have to invite Lorraine, of course. Trying to save himself from what he knew would cause a huge problem in the future, Kalyan tried to argue that Lorraine was just a commoner, and it would not be appropriate to invite her to a noble party. However, his wife argued that he knew her well enough to know that she would not be intimidated by something like that, and smiling, she assured him that everything would be fine. On the other side of the city, her uncle, alone, was still reflecting on what he should do. Now he would have to worry about whether those terrible rumors about Kalyan would lead to a divorce. Not that their romantic situation mattered much, but if that happened, the girl would certainly take what was hers by right, the mines, and then his plans would be ruined. He managed to break another glass from sheer rage. Now, more than ever, the man regretted not having killed the protagonist along with her parents. She had lived longer than she deserved anyway, and if things had gone according to his plan, now Serenial would be permanently resting alongside her parents at the bottom of the abyss. He should not have handed the mine over to her, but now it was too late. That was when an idea came to his mind. Perhaps this divorce and everything else would not be a bad thing for him after all, because he could help his niece take back the mine after the divorce and then kill her. She had no one with her to protect her anyway, so it would be an easy task. Poor fool. He just did not know that the Duke would never let that happen. On her birthday, the maid was surprised by how well put together her lady was. Indeed, she looked more beautiful than ever, wearing a dress and accessories that her new suitor had sent, and everything fit her like a glove. The girl could not help but take another look at the letter the man had sent along with the gifts, explaining that he had chosen them personally, so he would very much like her to wear them and was confident they would suit her. She had no idea how that man had guessed exactly what Serenial wanted, but it was good. When the maid asked how Lexian knew the dress size, the girl just gave a dry cough, trying to change the subject. And then she called her, arguing that if they kept that pace, they would arrive late to the girl's own birthday party. Serenial's birthday party defied everyone's expectations. First, because it took place at Count Verdelay's mansion, who had agreed to his niece's request when she asked if she could use the hall. He said her birthday deserved a grand celebration and nothing less. And just as he had promised, Lexian took care of all the preparations so that everything would be magnificent, or rather, perfect. The girl watched her guests from upstairs. She did not know any of those people and would now have to socialize with all of them, until finally someone called her. Her uncle, commenting that everything seemed to be in its proper place. The girl smiled politely, explaining that she was about to go downstairs, taking the opportunity to thank him for allowing the mansion to be used for her party. But the man made it clear that she did not need to do that, since she had been born and raised there, so it was her home. It was his as well. Even so, the girl expressed her happiness at having her request granted by her uncle and took the opportunity to comment that she had not seen Bane there, asking whether he had gone out or something like that, and her uncle gave a forced smile, before explaining that he had returned to his hometown because he had grown very tired of the job. Serenial pretended to believe it and lamented that he had not even said goodbye to her. However, changing the subject, the man said that he had reviewed the report the girl sent a few days earlier, acknowledging that it was more detailed and in-depth than he had expected, which left her satisfied. The old man took the opportunity to flatter her, saying that it was incomparable to the documents Kalyan used to send. And trying to plant a seed of discord in his niece's mind, he asked why she did not take over the administration herself once the investigation was over, something that left her mouth agape. But the man argued that she was the legitimate owner of the mine. Moreover, she had certainly heard the rumors about her husband, and regardless of whether they were true or not, it would not hurt to be cautious. The girl's expression changed completely, so that was what was happening. Her uncle was trying to prepare for the possible divorce between Kalyan and her, but his intentions were very transparent, because she knew that if she took possession of the mine and returned to live in the Viscount's house, he would certainly try to kill her, and that would be his greatest achievement. All the MC said was a simple, "Thank you for your concern," making it clear that she understood everything he was saying. But it was her birthday after all. In fact, she had something to talk to him about regarding that matter, and she was sure the man would understand soon enough. But she could not keep her guests waiting any longer, so she asked that if he still had something to say, he should wait until the end of the party. Somewhat awkward at having been dismissed like that, Vitir let his niece go. The woman went down the stairs, greeting everyone with a beautiful smile, thanking them for their presence despite the busy schedules of all the nobles there, and wishing them to enjoy the party. She ran into a marchioness, thanking her for coming in person, and the woman was friendly, saying that the honor was hers to have been invited. As she wandered among those unfamiliar people, Sereniel had to hear comments that she looked better than expected, and questions about whether she already knew about her husband's affair. But someone remarked that she was certainly already aware of everything, yet was putting on some kind of performance, pretending to be strong. Otherwise, why throw such a party for the first time? The noblewoman commented on the matter as if she had great intimacy with the MC, claiming that she was trying to project an image of not caring about anything and being fine. It really was a pity. Another spoiled snake chimed in, saying that she should have hidden herself after the rumors broke. Kalyan arrived a little late and visibly nervous, approaching his wife, while the other women commented that seeing him like that only indicated that the rumors were false. He apologized for the delay, but Sereniel did not even care. The red-haired woman's tongue remained sharp as she said that Sereniel was indeed a very pure person, but that there were terrible men in the world. Men who pretended to love their wives while misbehaving behind their backs, so perhaps the two of them were just pretending as well? But smiling, the redhead said she was just excited to see what else would happen at that little party, accompanied by a friend who loved seeing other people suffer. Their conversation was interrupted when the hostess asked if everything was all right, wanting to know if they were enjoying the party, and they confirmed with surreal falseness, lying by saying they were just commenting on how grateful they were to have been invited. Kalyan pulled his wife by the shoulders, asking that if the girls needed anything, they should talk to him. After all, they had come from very far away for his wife, and he did not want any inconvenience. The woman who had been fiercely slandering Sereniel moments earlier now commented on how the Viscount seemed to be in love with her. After all, he was very kind. However, something caught that group of gossipers' attention even more. Or rather, someone. They could not believe who was entering the hall with the most awkward expression. It was Lorraine, downcast for the first time in her life, since she always acted with such arrogance. Kalyan was horrified by her presence, while Sereniel merely kept a closed expression. But she soon approached her friend, welcoming her, and pretending to be happy that she was there, commenting on trivialities, such as how annoying it must have been to make such a long trip for a party. But the woman was subdued, saying it was nothing at all and even apologized for the delay. Sereniel told her not to worry. After all, there were other guests who had not arrived yet either. The noble's murmurs began quickly, commenting on how audacious it was for the girl to appear there, especially considering that she was a mere commoner and Kalyan's mistress, of course. Into her ear, Sereniel whispered for her not to mind that kind of comment, since it was she herself who had invited her friend. People commented on how Sereniel was a kind woman for leaving everything in the past, on how she knew what her presence would cause there, and on how Lorraine had been supported by the Verdelais family since childhood, which made everything even more unbelievable. There was no way to forgive either the Viscount or her. Of course, considering that the girl came from nowhere, she probably did not feel like she had anything to lose. Perhaps Kalyan had even been seduced by that perverse woman. Lorraine knew that this was nothing more than the girl's plan. She had only invited her there to create a scandal. Sereniel, on the other hand, was having quite a night. She was certain that her friend had laughed at her when she received the invitation to her birthday after so many rumors, thinking that Kalyan was already entirely hers and that the protagonist was nothing more than an idiot for trying to put on such a little act. That was why she arrived there so calm and downcast. Even burning with rage, Lorraine tried to think that even if all that commotion happened, nothing would change. In the end, she would still be the winner, because Kalyan's betrayal was an undeniable fact. After all, it was Lorraine who had won his heart and given birth to his child. The party went on a little less tense, and the girl excused herself from one of the trivial conversations with unfamiliar nobles, climbing the stairs quickly, and apologizing as she called everyone's attention, saying that she had something to share and needed them to listen. First, she would like to express her sincere gratitude to everyone who had come, because she truly appreciated that they had accepted such a sudden invitation, saying that, thanks to them, she would certainly remember that birthday forever. From the crowd, Lorraine and Kalyan trembled as the girl continued her speech, commenting that she knew everyone had come to celebrate her birth, but she imagined that the rumors circulating in the city had also influenced their presence there. That was why she would like to talk about them. So that really was her intention. Lorraine did not flinch. In fact, she only wanted her to be honest. Kalyan looked a little more fearful. Kalyan also looked a little more hopeful, wanting the woman to say that those rumors were just lies and that there was nothing wrong with their marriage, even if that was not true. Her uncle, in turn, imagined that she would deny them as well. However, fiddling with her ring, the girl began to explain the situation between her and the Viscount, revealing that the two of them were preparing for a divorce and that, as everyone there knew, the reason was very clear. Serenial confirmed the rumor about everything that had happened because of the mistakes of her now ex-husband, leaving him terrified, and Lorraine even more horrified. But the woman did not care. She simply dropped the ring, announcing that from that day on, the ties between the Helcar family and the Verdelais family were broken. The ring rolled down the stairs like the end of an era, and the murmuring among the nobles did not take long to begin. How so? So that meant Serenial wanted a divorce? It was all too shocking to be true. But the girl stated that she had chosen to hold the party in that place to properly announce this process of separation, and that, moreover, the Viscount had generously shown respect and consideration for the relationship they had in the past. But finally, there was someone who needed to be mentioned, her dear friend Lorraine, who was there now. Rage overtook the woman in a second, because all of that was an endless lie. But that did not stop Serenial, who simply continued her speech, saying that the girl probably thought she was acting like an idiot, yet she would like to accept the sincere apologies of the two of them one last time, until Kalyan tried to reach her to say that all of that was a misunderstanding, and to deny to the nobles present in that hall that anything the girl had said was true, arguing that it was nothing more than unfounded gossip and threatening anyone who continued to spread it. Kalyan shouted, saying that he had never had any evidence to confirm those rumors. All attention was on him until the doors opened to reveal the majestic Duke of Rosenwester. His presence there was a surprise. Now the realization was starting to sink in. Kalyan looked at his wife and at that man, alternating nonstop, while questioning what he was doing there. The man's gaze was attentive, at least until it landed on the ring on the floor, making a point of stepping on it, before restraining Kalyan, asking whether he could never keep those damn hands to himself. He also asked whether his mistress knew about that fact, because if she knew and still chose to betray with him anyway, she must have terrible taste in men. The whispers surrounded Lorraine like screams of humiliation, until the noblewomen began to wonder what the Duke was doing there. After all, he never appeared at social events, though they had heard that he had retired from the battlefield. Slapping Kalyan, the man mocked his claim of having no concrete evidence about those rumors, until he pointed to a woman who had arrived with him, questioning how he could say something like that with her present there. He was definitely in a terrible position, because that was the maid who took care of Lorraine and her son, who lived in the village. With all of that revealed, the Duke provoked him, telling him to repeat to the nobles that it was nothing more than cheap gossip. There was nowhere left to run, so all Kalyan managed to do was ask why he was doing this, but our man kept the same cold look on his face, before telling Kalyan to repeat what he had said, provoking him by asking whether he could not do it. After all, it seemed that everyone there was waiting to hear what he had to say. Serenial, meanwhile, exchanged glances with her former friend, who was trembling with rage. Her uncle, who was still there, merely watched the scene from a distance he considered safe. Finally, the girl stepped in, asking to continue the speech, and she explained that the only reason she pretended not to know about the affair between her husband and her best friend was because of the strong friendship she had with Lorraine and the affection she felt for both of them. But the two of them deceived her until the very last moment, even going against her own life. But she had enough evidence to prove all of that. Now Lorraine was truly shocked. How could that idiot know everything? Apparently, she was much smarter than the lovebirds had thought. With that coming to light, Vedder wanted to crawl into a hole out of sheer shame, just listening to his niece repeat once more that, considering the entire situation, she had decided to put an end to her own marriage. And, as she had mentioned before, this was a decision the Viscount had already agreed to. He could even have made the situation much bigger than it was. But as an act of mercy, he chose not to do so. That was the reason he was able to attend her party that day. The focus shifted to how generous Serenial was. After all, anyone in her place would have made the man's life a living hell. Serenial knew that hating someone was very easy and feeling pity even easier. If she had taken a harsher stance, they would have said she was a heartless woman and that her aggressive personality was what caused the betrayal. She was smart enough to know that the nobles there loved to gossip without thinking for even a second. So all she needed to do was show that she was the victim in that situation. And that was exactly what she did. Because Kalyan came out as a shameless man, along with Lorraine, of course, who was now the joke of high society. However, the most important part came to light. What would happen to the Viscount's business with the mines? After all, there were investors there. That was what worried her uncle, who did not care at all whether the girl would divorce or not, since it would be a good opportunity for him. What truly kept him awake, however, was why Lexion had appeared at the party. Smiling, he said that if the investors wanted their money back, he would take care of it, genuinely surprising Serenial. Until he revealed that from then on, House Rosenwester would cover all the necessary expenses for the mine, including future investments, so that the girl would not have to worry about money. Vetter burned with rage. He could not believe such audacity. Kalyan, who had been silent like a useless idiot, shouted, asking what right he had to make such a proposal to his wife. The Duke spoke as if he were Serenial's guardian, and he did not understand why he was there. Out of patience, the man grabbed him by the collar. He knew that, if he were her guardian, Kalyan would already be 6 feet under. In fact, he would have been dead for a long time. But he remembered his words. Releasing him like a rat, Lexian stated that, if he became the girl's guardian, he would have the right to do whatever he wanted with that fool. And that mention surprised everyone there. What did the Duke of Rosenwester mean by all of this? That was Vider's question, as he claimed that his niece had never spoken about anything like that. If she truly were to get a divorce, he would be her legal guardian. Besides, the divorce was not even finalized yet. So what he had just said, in front of those people, could confuse their minds. She knew that this was not what worried her uncle. Serenial was no longer a foolish little girl. What he truly cared about was the part where Lexian said he would cover all the necessary expenses for the mine. She also knew that the Empire would learn about what happened at her birthday party in less than a week, and everyone knew very well that the Rosenwester and Verdelay houses were not exactly on the best terms. So, if her uncle did not fix things at that moment, it would be worse for him. However, the Duke stepped in, agreeing with Vider, saying that he had not even spoken about that with Serenial yet. All of his words were confusing to the man, until Lexian called out to the girl he loved so much, and asked what she thought about renouncing the Helkar name and taking another one, pulling something very important from his pocket, something that even the girl did not seem to expect, judging by how flushed she became. And extending a small box with a delicate ring inside, he states that if she accepted his proposal, he swore by everything that was most precious to him that he would never again let anyone even lay a hand on her, because he would protect her forever. He was proposing to her in front of everyone there, kneeling like a